Section 43 of the American Book of the Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Natalia Cox. The American Book of the Dog, G. O. Shields, editor. Section 43, The Italian Greyhound, by G. Irwin Royce, M.D. History has not told us with any degree of certainty when or where this delicate, sensitive, and graceful little animal originated, but it is safe to conclude that it had the same origin as the other types of the greyhound family, that by careful breeding, and no doubt by considerable inbreeding, it has been reduced to its present size and form, and from the name we may reasonably infer that it has long been known as a native of Italy. It is also plentiful in southern France and in other countries where the climate is always mild and equable. The Italian Greyhound was taken to England about the time of Charles I. At least this is as far back as any account is given of their being seen in that country, and since their introduction there they have been bred down to finer and more perfect models, more nearly resembling in conformation the larger type of greyhound. Still, they have always been the same delicate, graceful creature that we see them today, and they have ever been the favorites of the nobility in nearly all parts of Europe where they can survive. We read of them as the pets of the Montagues and the Capulets, and even in our own day some of the best specimens extant have been in the possession of Her Majesty the Queen of England. Poets have immortalized this dog in verse, and Landseer, Paul Veronese, and others of the old masters have employed their brushes to faithfully chronicle his exquisite formation and graceful outlines. Comparing the more modern form of the Italian Greyhound with pictures of the older specimens, we see but slight variation between the various models. In fact, the Italian is but a miniature English Greyhound in most of his points of beauty, with rather larger and more languishing eyes, and a more delicate color to his coat. These latter excellencies no doubt contribute largely to their popularity, and have been instrumental in making them the pets of royalty and the inmates of chateaux and palaces. There has probably been less change in their general formation than that of any other variety of the canine race, and still in but rare instances has anything like the correct type been produced, the noted Molly, owned by Mr. W. MacDonald of Winchmore Hill, Middlesex, England, having been nearer perfection than any other Italian ever brought to public notice. She was small, of a delicate dove color, especially good in head, and all judges under whose observation she came pronounced her nearly perfect. There have been but few fanciers in this country who have given attention to breeding this toy dog, and consequently, at the present time, few good specimens are seen at our bench shows. Only now and then is one seen in this country that at all approaches the standard of the breed. But I see a gradual tendency toward substituting the Italian for the pug and other toy varieties, and in the near future we may look for a vast improvement in these pets. They are grace itself, and their beauty, their loving disposition, delicate sensitiveness, and scrupulous cleanliness make them an ornament and a delight to any household. Occasionally they have been utilized in the field for coursing hares, but with poor success, for having so long been confined to the parlor, the hunting instinct has lain dormant, and should the average Italian Greyhound be shown a hare, a rat, or other vermin, he would undoubtedly show fear rather than a desire to kill. Now and then one may be seen with courage enough to stand for his rights, and may be so pugnacious as to dispute your right of entrance to the house. Two good specimens that have been under my observation for several years will destroy the largest rat with all the skill and eagerness of a terrier, and I can see no reason why the breed should not serve a useful purpose in this direction. But it will require considerable care in breeding and training to overcome the natural timidity and the extreme sensitiveness that they possess in such a marked degree. Those bred in England and in this country have only been used as pets and lap dogs, but in Italy they have been put to more practical use, and there they show more courage, gameness, and better staying qualities. Where the questionable sport of box coursing with small rabbits has been indulged in, the Italian Greyhound has been crossed out with the Fox Terrier and the Bull Terrier, with the object of increasing the speed of the terrier and adding to the gameness of the Italian. The cross produces a very useful little dog, with a strong inclination toward the form of the terrier, and such dogs have been found useful in coursing hares. The Italian has also been crossed with the Black and Tan Terrier, with a view to softening and refining the latter, and the experiment has been attended with considerable success, but it is necessary to breed back to the terrier the second time to fully establish the color and restore the formation to the standard for that breed. I can see but little to be gained by outcrossing with the English Greyhound, as only a small specimen of the Greyhound would be the result, and this would be neither ornamental nor useful, and there could scarcely be any gain in either formation or disposition. But the position that they should occupy in the canine world is that of a lapdog or parlor pet. Here they are in their true element, and one can lavish on them all the affection that he may desire, and it will be reciprocated with as nearly human love as can be expected in any one of the domestic animals. They are as loving as a dove, and delicate enough in their manifestations of affection to satisfy the most sensitive and refined lady. They are harmless, amiable, and ornamental, and their elegant attitudes and delicate shades of color can but please the most fastidious. They are never happier or more contented than when curled up in the lap of a loving mistress, feeling the gentle caress and enjoying the natural warmth and magnetism of the human body. During the warm weather they enjoy a romp on the lawn, but it is usually of short duration, and the appearance of a rude boy or a large strange dog will be the signal for a sudden disappearance, and they hie away to a place of safety. Being naturally of a delicate constitution, and with a very thin skin, the Italian is sensitive to sudden changes of temperature, even in summer, and at the approach of autumn they show that pinched-up look that is so characteristic of a cold dog. Should they be exposed to cold and dampness combined for any length of time, they would likely contract so severe a disease as to carry them off in a short time. The tendency would be towards some form of lung disease. They should therefore be carefully guarded against severe changes, and when taken out should be warmly clothed with a neat blanket, but should they contract any disease, the utmost care should be exercised in administering treatment, for remember they are like a frail infant. The medicine given should be scrupulously reduced to minimum doses, and only the milder preparations should be used in treating any skin eruption with which they may be afflicted. Other portions of this work will give full directions for treating diseases of the dog, but I wish to especially enjoin care in the matter of dose, for even the physician is not always careful enough in graduating the prescription to the more delicately organized human being. The Italian should have, in formation, the same points of excellence as the English Greyhound, with little or no variation from the fixed standard, but the special fanciers of this variety of the species allow considerable margin in some few points, as in the form of the head, the greater fullness of the eye often giving them that dish-faced appearance that greatly detracts from the beauty of a large greyhound. Their tails are inclined to be shorter in proportion to the size of the body, their ears larger, and much allowance is made for the lack of muscle, but by judicious and careful breeding these points can be wholly overcome, and a specimen that will, in truth, be a miniature English greyhound will reward the efforts of the fancier. However, in too many instances, instead of breeding to produce a perfect Italian greyhound, the money value only has been considered, and little effort has been made in this country to build up a reliable strain of this breed. My first experience in trying to secure one of the Italians was so unfortunate that it put a damper on my enthusiasm which took some years to overcome. I sent to a breeder in one of the western states for a female, and after receiving several very enthusiastic letters concluded to order one. When the little creature came, to keep her company the party sent along a changed dog, weighing somewhere about 12 pounds, on chance of my taking him too. I received them of the express company, paying, I remember, a rather long price for the immense box in which they were shipped, took them home in the evening to the suburbs of the city in which I then resided, opened the box with all confidence that they would come to me to be fondled, but what was my astonishment to find them as wild as a coyote. They would scarcely come near the house, and for 2 weeks were like wild dogs, staying in the woods and fields at a good safe distance from any residence. They were finally captured in a large trap by a neighbor, after 2 days of careful watching, he being especially stimulated by a reward of $5 that I offered. They were once more tamed, and after a time I gave them away, as the female was practically valueless as a breeder, and the dog wholly so, of course. Both were very poor specimens of the breed. I have since purchased 6 of different breeders, but only 2 out of the lot were at all suitable for breeding purposes, and I have been led to conclude that there are no really scientific breeders that are giving attention to the Italian Greyhound. If there is one, I have not been fortunate enough to learn the fact. There are several grand good specimens scattered about, but they are owned by individuals who have them simply for their own pleasure, as in the case of Peach, who is owned by Mr. Hanson of Topeka, Kansas. She is a fine specimen, and no money consideration would tempt him to part with her. Peach weighs about 7½ pounds, is of a rich golden fawn color, and is quite symmetrical throughout. She would undoubtedly win on the bench in company with the best of them. The standard and points of judging an Italian Greyhound are as follows: head, value 5, neck, 5, ears and eyes, 5, legs and feet, 10, forequarters, 10, hindquarters, 10, tail, 5, coat, 5, color, 15, symmetry, 15, size, 15, total 100. The head, value 5, if possible, should be as snake-like as that of the English Greyhound, but such formation is now never met with. The nearer it approaches it, the better. In all recent exhibits, the skull is more or less round, and the face, though still pointed, is too short, with a tendency to turn up. The neck, value 5, is long and elegant, resembling closely its larger congener. Ears and eyes, value 5. Many modern prize takers are deficient in the proper shape of the ear, but this should not be overlooked, for it still exists in the breed as an exact counterpart of the English Greyhound's corresponding organ, though always somewhat enlarged in comparison with the body. The eye is much larger proportionately, soft and languishing, but it ought never to weep. The color of the iris is usually a dark brown. Legs and feet, value 10. See the Greyhound. Forequarters, value 10. See the Greyhound. Hindquarters, value 10. As with the last 2 sections, the only difference lies in comparative value, the English dog's points being estimated from the workmanlike view, while the Italian is regarded from an artistic standpoint. The tail, value 5, is somewhat shorter than the English dog's, but it must be gently curved in the same tobacco pipe way, and should be fine in bone except at the root, as well as free from hair. The coat, value 5, should be short, soft, and silky. The color, value 15, of the Italian Greyhound is largely to be taken into consideration, and is consequently estimated at a high figure. Fawns are now far in the ascendant, and to no other color would the full value be accorded. A small star on the breast, or a white toe, takes off a point or 2 according to the extent of white, but in all cases the toenails should be dark. The symmetry, value 15, of this little dog must be carefully estimated, as a want of elegance in detail, or of combination in due proportion, alike lowers the value of these points separately to a very low ebb. The size, value 15, of the bitch for modern successful exhibition should be little over 5 pounds, nor should the dog exceed 7 or 7½ pounds. Beyond these weights, a specimen, however good in other respects, has little or no chance of a first prize in anything like a good class. The Italian Greyhound is not a prolific breeder, and but few of the females are strong enough to nourish a large litter. To balance this, not more than 3 or 4 are usually produced in a litter, though occasionally there may be 6. But should this occur, a foster mother will have to be secured, or hand-raising resorted to, in order to save those that the delicate mother is not able to nourish. It is therefore wise to provide for such an emergency that the whole litter may be saved, for generally the smaller and more desirable ones would succumb first to lack of care. The food most suitable for the Italian at all times is table scraps. These should be carefully prepared by mixing bread, cooked meat, and potatoes with a little gravy, milk, or the like. If too much meat is given, they are apt to contract skin disease, which is quite difficult to overcome. But he won't eat anything but meat, you may say. That may be so now, but by reducing the quantity and gradually mixing other articles with the meat, you can bring about a radical change, even in the case of an old dog. Begin with the puppy, and you can mold his taste to your liking. The Italian must have plain food and a certain amount of vegetable matter, and all should be free from pepper, mustard, and acids. You should vary the diet, more or less, giving different articles of food every few days. Preparation for the bench show is simple enough, but a few suggestions may not be amiss. Be especially careful not to have the dog too fat. This is a common fault and can be overcome by reducing the diet and giving plenty of vigorous exercise, but they should be round and smooth, with coats glossy, the bony framework showing the least bit, and with as much muscle as can be developed conventionally. As, however, they are not designed for field work, muscle is not so important. They need not be washed very frequently, as their cleanly habits will obviate the necessity for this, but rubbing with a damp cloth, followed by a vigorous application of a dry flannel and the dry hand, will serve the purpose much better. The rubbing will also serve to develop the muscles. Get the dog accustomed to the ways of the street and to strangers, and your task is finished. The principles of breeding will undoubtedly be thoroughly treated of in other portions of the work, but there seems to be so little heed given to the careful directions for improving the different varieties of the domestic animals that repetition becomes fairly a necessity. In selecting a mate for an Italian Greyhound, the first consideration should be to overcome any defects that may exist, and at the same time to preserve in the offspring the good qualities that either or both parents may possess. Of course a dog nearly perfect is desired, if it be possible to secure such, but you can at least get a mate that is strong and fine where yours may be deficient. If your dog has a bad head, get a mate with a specially good head. If his tail is too short, see that the mate has a good long tail. In some of the young you will be sure to combine the good qualities of both parents. Keep such, and still try and go on to perfection. The greatest care should be exercised, lest some of the most valuable puppies be lost. Reserve the best always. Select carefully, and nick properly should be the motto in breeding. The Greyhound family is deservedly popular, and as the larger varieties are brought into favorable notice through their valuable qualities as coursers, I hope to see their more elegant but feebler relatives, modestly and timidly though they may be, share in the general popularity of these aristocratic dogs. End of section 43. Recording by Natalia Cox.
Section 44 of The American Book of the Dog.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Engle. The American Book of the Dog, G.O. Shields, editor.
Section 44.
The Pug, by George W. Fisher. The true origin of this peculiar breed of dogs is unknown. Some naturalists believe that the pug and the mastiff are closely related. Indeed, the close resemblance between the two breeds gives the theory considerable force. Other naturalists infer that a dwarf mastiff may possibly have been mated with a bulldog, and that they were the parents of the first pug. The latter theory has certainly a great deal in its favor, for the reason that so many of the pugs have the rose ear, are undershot, out at elbows, and some have black breasts with white legs and feet, all characteristics of the bulldog. The latest theory is that the pug is the result of a cross between the bulldog and the Japanese spaniel. To my mind, the pug shows no evidence of such a cross, either in shape, color, or disposition. The first pugs were doubtless bred in England, but further than this, it is doubtful if the true origin of the breed will ever be known. We know that everything, whether animate or inanimate, is of some particular utility and has some purpose to serve, and so the pug, whatever his origin, doubtless is here for a purpose. While perhaps he is of no value as a hunter, yet his gentle disposition and good temper render him invaluable as a companion for children, and as a pet for the fair sex. Indeed, it seems that his special mission is to be a companion to the little ones. His chief delight and pleasure is to frolic and romp with them. They may pull, bite, and whip him with impunity, and he never resents their assaults. He has never been known to go mad or to become ill-tempered, as do many other dogs when they grow old. As for cleanliness, he is unequaled. He can repose on silk or satin without leaving behind him that disagreeable smell so common to dogs of other breeds. He can also be utilized to a certain extent as a watchdog. He's a close observer, and scarcely anything escapes his watchful eye. One characteristic of the pug which seems to command attention everywhere is his aristocratic nature. His dignified carriage and haughty manner are proofs of his aristocracy, besides the fact that he is owned and caressed by the kings and queens, the lords and ladies, and by people of every class, who endeavor to possess him on account of his affectionate, lovable, and intelligent nature. Another characteristic is that he bears confinement in the house better than almost any other breed. It can also be said that he is the only sweet-skinned animal in the whole canine race, and this fact, combined with his smooth, glossy coat, makes him a desirable pet for the carriage and drawing-room. Mr. Morrison, a prominent English fancier, took more pains in cultivating this breed in his day than any other breeder. Yet Lord Willoughby Daresby claimed a strain from a totally different source. The Morrison pug is of a yellow fawn color, with a distinct trace from occiput to tail, while the Willoughby is a stone fawn with a black saddle. There is no breed that has been bred more carefully and that has been improved so much in the last 10 years as has the pug. The long-legged and muzzled pug is now replaced by the handsome little cobby fellow of an entirely different type. I am perfectly safe in saying that the pug requires more care in breeding than does any other breed. There are so many difficult points to perfect and overcome, and such a strong tendency in the breed to revert from approved types, that the greatest care and watchfulness are necessary to prevent this. The most important point of all is to first select a good sire. Get the best that is obtainable. Be careful that he possesses the essential points, such as the hereditary transmission of character and disposition. This is one of nature's most important laws. Strains are only properly sustained in their purity by breeding to the best stock that can be had. In selecting a sire, never breed to a long-legged one. Limit his weight to 15 pounds if possible. It is much easier to find a good large pug than a good small one. The bitch usually comes in season when 8 months old, and after she has attained that age, generally comes in season twice a year. As soon as she gives evidence of coming in season, remove her to a warm room on the 2nd or 3rd floor. If possible, give her a companion, either a playful puppy or an old bitch. This will keep her from fretting, and will keep her in good cheer and humor during her confinement. The confinement usually lasts about 21 days, and a cheerful companion doubtless adds to the number of her puppies. The bitch should be bred on the 12th day after the first signs are given. 1 service is sufficient, and more than 2 should never be given. These should be 24 hours apart. She should whelp in 60 to 63 days. During her pregnancy, the breeder should take particular care to give the bitch a sufficient amount of exercise. The more she is left in the open air, the better it will be for her and her offspring. There's no definite way of ascertaining until 21 days have passed whether or not she is in whelp. About 10 days before she is due to whelp, rid her of fleas, if she has them, by an application of insect powder. I consider a well-tanned sheepskin, with the wool on, the best bed for a bitch to whelp on. Care must be taken to have it well tacked in a tight box. The puppies will be born one after another at intervals of 1/4 to 3/4 of an hour. During this time, allow nothing whatever to disturb her. Keep her warm and quiet, and as soon as she is through, remove her and puppies to clean, dry quarters. Restrict her food for the first 10 days to sweet milk, boiled rice, oatmeal, and meat broth. After that time has elapsed, she may be fed of any kind of suitable food. She should be allowed free access to open air and yard for exercise, etc. Puppies should be taken from the bitch when 5 weeks old. The important process of rearing pug puppies should begin when they are 3 weeks old. They should be taken separately and placed to a dish containing 2/3 milk and 1/3 warm water, adding a little sugar. By touching their lips to the mixture, they will instinctively begin to lap it with an apparent appreciation. This process should be continued 3 times a day for the space of 10 days, and at the expiration of that time they can be given pure milk and meat broth thickened with wheat bread, boiled rice, and oatmeal. They should frequently be given bones to gnaw at, which exercise acts admirably as a toothbrush. A careful effort should be made to avoid overloading their stomachs. Never allow food to remain in their dishes. When they have attained the age of 6 or 7 weeks, they are old enough to sell. At this time it is also well to rid them of worms. This can be accomplished by giving each puppy 10 grains of camellia on an empty stomach. This will expel all worms in 3 hours, without any danger to the dog. In 3 days, repeat the dose. This precaution has saved many a puppy for me. To prepare the pug for the show bench, he should be washed once a week with pure Castile soap, and should be groomed every day with a soft brush. It will add greatly to his appearance to rub his coat freely with the hands. His food should consist of boiled meat, rice, and oatmeal. By adding a tablespoonful of ground flaxseed and a raw egg twice a week, a marvelous effect will be produced on his coat, and it will at the same time regulate his bowels. Let it be remembered that outdoor exercise is as essential as good food. The pug is, of course, subject to the same diseases as other dogs, and their symptoms are the same. The following remedies I have prescribed and used in my kennel with great success. For worms, give 10 grains of camellia on an empty stomach. Repeat in 3 days. This will expel pin, tape, and stomach worms without danger. For fits, if caused by worms, give the camellia as above. If caused by teeth or distemper, give 20 grains of bromide potash every 3 hours. For distemper, take saltpeter 60 grains, sulfur 60 grains, aloes 20 grains. Mix and put in 12 powders. Give 1 powder each day. Avoid giving open-air exercise. Keep them in a separate room at a temperature of about 60 degrees. Tonic. For loss of appetite or to tone up the system after distemper or other disease, take quinine, 12 grains, extract gentian, 12 grains, extract nux vomica, 1 grain. Mix and make in 12 pills. Give 1 pill morning and evening. Mange. Take sulfur, 2 ounces, saltpeter, 1/2 ounce, cosmoline, 4 ounces. Mix and apply to parts affected by rubbing well. Wash it off in 24 hours. Then cover the dog completely with coal oil and allow it to remain on for 12 hours. Then wash him with Castile soap. Repeat in 5 days, if not thoroughly cured. The standard. Symmetry, Value 10. Size 5. Condition 5. Body 10. Legs 5. Feet 5. Head 5. Muzzle 5. Ears 5. Eyes 10. Mask 5. Wrinkles 5. Tail 5. Trace 5. Coat 5. Color 5. General carriage 5. Total 100. Acknowledged points. Symmetry. Symmetry in general appearance decidedly square and cobby. A lean, leggy pug and a dog with short legs and a long body are equally objectionable. Size and condition. The pug should be multum in parvo, but this condensation, if the word may be used, should be shown by compactness of form, well-knit proportions, and hardness of developed muscle. Weight to be from 13 to 17 pounds, dog or bitch. Body, short and cobby, wide in chest, and well ribbed up. Legs, very strong, straight, of moderate length, and well under. Feet, neither so long as the foot of the hare, nor so round as that of a cat. Well split up toes, and the nails black. Muzzle, short, blunt, square, but not up-faced. Head, large, massive, round, not apple-headed, with no indentation of the skull. Eyes, dark in color, very large, bold and prominent, globular in shape, soft and salacious in expression, very lustrous, and, when excited, full of fire. Ears, thin, small, soft, like black velvet. There are two kinds, the rose and button. Preference is given to the latter. Markings, clearly defined, the muzzle or mask, ears, moles on cheeks, thumb mark, or diamond on forehead. Back trace should be as black as possible. Mask, the mask should be black. The more intense and well-defined it is, the better. Wrinkles, large and deep. Trace, a black line extending from the occiput to the tail. Tail, curled tightly as possible over the hip. The double curl is perfection. Coat, fine, smooth, soft, short, glossy, neither hard nor woolly. Color, silver or apricot fawn. Each should be decided to make the contrast complete between the color and the trace and mask. Among the many breeders of good pugs in this country we may mention the following. Dr. M. H. Cryer, 1527 Arch Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. George W. Fisher, Cottawassee, Pennsylvania. A. E. Pitts, Columbus, Ohio. Eberhart Pug Kennels, 212 Main Street, Cincinnati, Ohio. J. H. Bowden, 296 West 12th Street, New York City. C. W. Boger, 1939 Kamek Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Miss L. Linden, 214 West 45th Street, New York City. Acme Kennels, 413 Chestnut Street, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. J. J. Lynn, Port Huron, Michigan. Miss M. E. Bannister, Cranford, New Jersey. Mrs. Charles Wheatley, 129 East 16th Street, New York City. Mrs. S. C. Barnum, 329 Lexington Avenue, New York City. E. D. Bruce, 17th Street and Broadway, New York City. Mrs. M. A. Cunningham, 412 West 45th Street, New York City. R. Schreier, 365 First Avenue, New York City. C. E. Osborne, Stepney, Connecticut. Mrs. J. F. Campbell, Custom House, Montreal, Canada. Miss J. A. Yard, 2 West 43rd Street, New York City. Roger Harrison, 84 Cherry Street, New York City. L. A. Riedezel, 158 Gay Street, Baltimore, Maryland. G. W. Wambach, 2 North Liberty Street, Baltimore, Maryland. William J. Bryson, 204 Dearborn Street, Chicago. Miss A. B. Van Horn, 180 Penn Avenue, Allegheny, Pennsylvania. J. A. Lawson, 263 East Broad Street, Columbus, Ohio. L. S. Hudson, Lansing, Michigan. A.F. German, Louisville, Kentucky. Mrs. J. Smith, 7 McLean Court, Boston, Massachusetts. Miss A.H. Whitney, Lancaster, Massachusetts. W.A. Peck, New Haven, Connecticut. E.E. Parnell, Spencer, Iowa. Dr. S. Plant, 18 Travers Street, Boston, Massachusetts. Miss Grace M. Hall, Portland, Maine. R.T. Harrison, 84 Cherry Street, New York City. Seminole Kennels, Chestnut Hill, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. George H. Hardy, 10 Coleman Street, Cincinnati, Ohio. R.T. Prout, Newark, Ohio. J.C. Nims, Plainsville, Ohio.
End of section 44.
Recording by Jill Engle.
Section 45 of the American Book of the Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Mack, Tucson, Arizona. The American Book of the Dog, G. O. Shields, editor. Section 42, The Mexican Hairless Dog, by Elroy Foote. But little is known as to the origin of this breed or as to its history, since that period and the literature of the subject seems to be comprised in the following few references. G. R. Jesse, in his Researches into the History of the British Dog, referring to the dogs of Buenos Aires, says, "There are also small dogs without hair, except on the head and tail, which are shagged. They are often companions of the ladies of the country." In his work on The Dog, Youatt calls attention to the vast difference between dogs of the same general type, as illustrated by the members of the Greyhound family, by the Highland, English, and Italian Greyhound, and the small hairless one of Africa or Brazil. Again, in the same work we read that the Turkish Greyhound is a small hairless dog with only a few hairs on his tail, never used in the field and bred only as a spoiled pet. Stonehenge quotes almost verbally from Youatt on the same subject. Vero Shaw, in his fine work, The Book of the Dog, in the chapter on the Rampur dog, says, "This dog, we believe, made his first appearance in England on the return of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales from his Indian tour. At all events, we have no recollection of having seen any specimens of the Rampur Hound at dog shows, except at the Fakenham Dog Show of 1876. Only 2 appeared. One was of a mouse color, the other spotted, a sort of pink and blue, somewhat similar to young plum pudding colored pigs. In appearance, the Rampur dog somewhat resembles a small deerhound, but his chief characteristic is the absence of hair, which leaves his body smooth. We have, however, been informed that since they have been in this country, a little hair has appeared on these dogs." Shaw also quotes Mr. W. K. Taunton describing the Chinese crested dog, so called from having a crest of hair running along the top of the head from front to back. In addition to this, the dog has a tuft of hair at the end of his tail, but otherwise, with the exception of a few scattering hairs around the head and muzzle and just above the feet, the dog is perfectly hairless, the skin being more or less mottled in some specimens. There is another hairless dog said to come from China, considerably smaller than the breed mentioned above, and weighing 8 or 10 pounds, and without any hair at all. The head is like the apple-headed toy terrier, with large bat ears standing out from the head, a very fine tail, and the skin of a uniform dark color. Here we have several different names for apparently the same kind of dog, although referred to as being native in Africa, Brazil, Buenos Aires, Turkey, India, and China, and being, as we know, also found in Mexico and Southern California. I believe they will be met in all warm climates. Whether these various strains of hairless dogs found in various hot climates are of a common origin, whether they have been distributed from some one country to the others, or whether they are the result of the so-called law of evolution, we can only conjecture. Whether in some quarter of the globe a breed of dogs has always existed, none of which ever had hair, because they did not need it, or whether they were once clothed with hair which gradually disappeared because they did not need it, who can say? If a strain of pugs or fox terriers were colonized in Central Africa and bred there for 25, 50, or 100 years, would their hair gradually disappear? Such a supposition seems scarcely plausible, since the wild dogs of India, many of whom who live almost under the equator, are thickly coated with hair, as are nearly all other quadrupeds in hot countries. Why, then, should one breed of small dogs exist in so many parts of the world entirely or nearly hairless? Will some Darwin, some Tyndall, some Huxley kindly investigate and give us the why and the wherefore? Whether hairless dogs are crested or plain hairless, of uniform mouse color or plum pudding color, as our English writer picturesquely styles them, or whether they have slate or pink points, as I once saw described, it seems reasonable to suppose them all of the same breed and of the same origin, inasmuch as the smooth and the rough-coated Fox Terrier are of the same breed. Which is the truer type I am not prepared to say, but I will unhesitatingly state my preference for the dark, smooth, and strictly hairless dog, as against the mottled and unfinished effect of the so-called crested dog. That the former is the much rarer style, I know to my sorrow, for in breeding from as good hairless stock as could be found, 3 out of 4 puppies would exhibit the unsightly pink points, and half of the litter would be blessed by nature with a slight covering for the head and tail. In Mexico, among the natives, these dogs are used externally for the treatment of rheumatism, and internally sometimes to assuage the pangs of hunger. There would necessarily be more virtue in their warm little bodies as a substitute for hot water bags than as an article of diet, at least judging from our civilized standpoint. The hairless dog is a pet and house dog only, and as such has some good qualities that his hairy brethren have not. He is naturally cleanly, a peculiarity not possessed by any other native Mexican, never leaves hair about on furniture or clothes, does not have fleas or any odor other than that of the soap with which one can keep his skin as sweet and pleasant to the touch as one's own. Like any other good house dog, he is naturally watchful and suspicious of strange footsteps, and he is strongly affectionate. There is an erroneous idea prevalent that these hairless dogs have to be kept blanketed in all but torrid weather. They do not require any more artificial warmth than the Italian Greyhound, but like them should always be blanketed when exposed to outdoor winds or wintry air, but never in the house. Much covering or coddling has a peculiar effect on the color of their skin, bleaching it more or less according to the warmth and duration of the extra protection. Puppies at birth are much lighter in hue than when older, many of the white spots becoming by degrees smaller and beautifully less, and some entirely disappearing. In several litters out of the dogs referred to, 3 or 4 puppies only have been born dark all over. It is essential to success in breeding in the North that the puppies should not be whelped in the winter. The early springtime is best, when it can be so arranged, as they are then pretty well grown and established in health and vigor before the advent of the cold months. Distemper is apt to be a serious matter with them, but I have never seen one afflicted with any kind of skin disease, unless I except one poor little bitch that was suffering from an eruption, the natural consequence of a diet of sweets and indigestible pastry. The dog illustrated, Me Too, is pretty well known in the East, and the portrait is a good one. As can be seen, he is of neither terrier nor greyhound shape. By the way, nearly all writers who have treated of this dog speak of him as a greyhound and not as a terrier. Me Too is broad-chested and of such muscular development as is rarely met with in specimens of this breed. The hind quarters are extremely graceful and greyhound-like in form and action. About the time the photograph was taken from which this engraving was made, Me Too ran 100 yards on an athletics club's grounds in a fraction over 7 seconds, without any training or understanding of what was expected of him. This was a trifle longer than the best on record for dogs up to that date, and this without turning a hair, if I may be allowed the expression. His tail is short, fine, and well set on, the back short and ribs well set on. The lines of the neck are so rounded as to have called forth the remark that it was like the neck of a lovely woman. His head is too short for a Greyhound or Terrier, but as a compensation he has a larger brain pan than either, and the soft brown eyes are full of expression. Muzzle nicely pointed, ears fine and perfectly erect, but not too large for the proportions. Skin all over, soft as undressed kid, almost black in summer, and a mouse color in winter. His teeth are bad, and this is a peculiarity of the breed, being few in number and indifferent in quality. Youatt, in his book, mentions this singular circumstance connected with the Turkish Hairless Dog, and I myself observed it. It may be safely inferred that a hairless dog with good teeth gets them as a result of a cross with some outsider. Me Too weighs 18 pounds. His measurements I have never taken, and he is so old now that it would not be fair to offer them. His serious faults are 2 white toes on the fore and hind feet on the right side, and a jaw slightly overshot or pig-jawed, as it is termed. He was shown during 5 years at 15 large bench shows and judged by 10 different judges without defeat, an unusual record. Mr. W. K. Taunton, an Englishman who has had larger experience of foreign dogs than any man living, judged the Mexican Hairless class at New York in 1888, and volunteered the remark that Me Too was a rare one, and that he had never seen his better. Mr. J. R. Pearson, formerly of Greyhound fame, has seen many of these dogs in Brazil, and has always considered Me Too a typical specimen. His breeding is entirely unknown to me, but I believe him to have been born about March 1882, as he came into my possession when undoubtedly a year old. Me Too is now aging fast, for this climate is not conducive to longevity in the Mexican hairless race. Nellie, now in possession of Mrs. E. C. Moore of New Rochelle, New York, is also of unknown pedigree, but in her prime was a fine one. She stands badly on her feet, but that is also unnatural to her. In color, she is even darker than Me Too, and her skin is of remarkable softness. A few white blotches are scattered over her legs and feet. Her face would be prettier if her eyes were not quite so prominent. As is proper in her sex, she is much less muscular than Me Too, stands a trifle higher on her legs, and is yet smaller, weighing about 14 pounds. Her action is much like that of the Italian Greyhound, and she is a pretty companion for a walk. Pickaninny was the result of breeding Me Too to Nellie, and she was the prettiest little bitch I ever saw. She lived to the age of 11 months and then died in the agonies of strychnine poisoning. White Wings is a very good bitch out of Me Too and Nellie, having, however, much white on all 4 legs, to which she owes her name. White Wings has been a bench show winner, but will never be able to compete again owing to blindness of one eye. I have heard of many fine Mexican hairless dogs, but actually have seen, outside of my own stock, only the few I mention below. Mead belonged to a Mr. Palmer of Passaic Falls, New Jersey. She was an all-dark one and very good, but died when about 6 years old without ever having been bred. She had, however, done some winning. I saw on the street in New York a little beauty and took the trouble to find out her home. She was run over and killed soon after, and the specimen her owner replaced her with was a poor one. I have seen only 2 good dogs. One was a puppy of Nellie's named Judge, who died of distemper after taking a prize at his first show, New Haven, 1885. He was only half Mexican, however, having been sired by an Italian Greyhound. Pippo, owned by Mrs. L. D. Hurd of New York, and winner at the 1890 show there, is a good dog, of heavier frame and holding his age much better. This completes the list of good ones that I have a personal knowledge of. Pedigrees are scarce, for the breed has never been cultivated and cared for as is necessary to establish them. Dogs of this breed should be washed occasionally with Castile soap, and a liberal application of Vaseline once a month, well rubbed in, will improve the appearance of the skin. Puppies, while very young, should be kept in a warm room and should be handled with great care, as they are extremely delicate and may be easily injured. Their bed should be made of Canton flannel and should be frequently washed. The Mexican, like all other dogs that are kept mainly in the house, should have plenty of exercise. It is well to teach any house dog to retrieve a ball, and someone should put in 20 to 30 minutes each day throwing the ball in the hall or adjoining rooms and having the dog bring it. Make him move as rapidly as possible. A lively run is best. Nearly all house dogs enjoy this sport when once taught it, and will enter into it with great zest. On every fair day, the dog should be given a run of at least half a mile in the street or in the country. The prejudice which exists in the minds of many against the hairless dog soon wears off if given the opportunity, for a better house pet with fewer disadvantages can seldom be found than a symmetrically formed, dark-colored, clean-skinned Mexican hairless dog. No standard or points of judging this breed have yet been adopted. End of section 45. Recording by tommack.
Section 46 of the American Book of the Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The American Book of the Dog, G.O. Shields, editor, Section 46. The Toy Spaniels by Miss Marion E. Bannister. The origin of the King Charles and Blenheim Spaniels is obscure, and beyond the fact that, as claimed by some writers, they came from Spain, little is known concerning it. King Charles II first rendered them popular in England by the care and attention he gave to the breeding and rearing of good specimens. Dr. Keynes writes of them as follows, quote, "Of the delicate, neat, and pretty kind of doggies called the spaniel gentle, or the comforter in Latin malatius or fater. These doggies are little, pretty, proper, and fine, and sought for to satisfy the delicateness of dainty dames and wanton women's wills. Instruments of folly for them to play and dally withal, to trifle away the treasure of time. These puppies, the smaller they be, the more pleasure they provoke, as more meet playfellows for mincing mistresses to bear in their bosoms." End quote. According to the good doctor, the superstitious people of the Middle Ages, even in enlightened England, believed that these little dogs possessed curative powers. On this subject he writes, quote, "We find that these little doggies are good to assuage the sickness of the stomach, being oftentimes thereunto applied as a plaster preservative, or borne in the bosom of the diseased and weak person, which effect is performed by their moderate heat. Moreover, the disease and sickness changeth his place, and entereth, though it not be precisely marked, into the doggy, which experience can testify. For these kind of doggies sometimes fall sick, and sometimes die, without any harm outwardly enforced, which is an argument that the disease of the gentleman or gentlewoman, or owner whatsoever, entereth into the doggy by the operation of heat intermingled and infected." End quote. Sir William Jardine, in the Naturalist's Library, 1843, speaks of the King Charles Spaniel as a beautiful breed, in general black and white, and presumed to be the parent of the Cocker, who is usually black and shorter in the back than the Spaniel. End quote. The Blenheim, Marlborough, or Pyram of Buffoon is very similar to the above, but the black color is relieved by fire-colored spots above the eyes, and the same on the breast and feet. The muzzle is fuller and the back rather short. The Maltese dog, Canis malitius, The Bichon, or Chien Buffet of Buffoon, is the most ancient of all the small spaniel races, being figured on Roman monuments and noticed by Strabo. The muzzle is rounder, the hair very long, silky, and usually white, the stature very small, and only fit for ladies' lapdogs. John Scott writes, 1830, in the Sportsman's Repository, quote, 20 years ago, i.e., 1800, His Grace the Duke of Marlborough was reputed to possess the smallest and best breed of cockers in Britain. They were invariably red and white, with very long ears, short noses, and black eyes. End quote. Still another writer claims that at least the King Charles type first came from Japan. Robert Fortune, who traveled in that country in the 17th century, says, quote, the lapdogs of the country, Japan, are highly prized, both by natives and foreigners. They are small, some of them not more than 9 or 10 inches in length. They are remarkable for snub noses and sunken eyes, and are certainly more curious than beautiful. They are carefully bred and command high prices, even among the Japanese, and are dwarfed, it is said, by the use of sake, a spirit to which their owners are particularly partial. End quote. Commenting on this statement, Idstone says, quote, I have seen several of these Japanese lapdogs. Some have been publicly exhibited, and others have been shown to me by gentlemen who imported them from that country. I recollect seeing 2 very beautiful specimens brought home by Mr. Clogstone of Winburn, Dorsetshire. These, both of them, had large, prominent eyes of the King Charles type, so that the sunken eye named by Fortune was a misnomer, and were only deficient in ear. Their color was pale yellow and white, and the coat was silky. The noses of those I saw were very short, but the skull was not so round as the London breeder would desire, yet showing a tendency to the spherical formation which is a mark of the race. In corroboration of my statement, I will give Sir Rutherford Alcock's own words, quote, I am to find a pair of well-bred Japanese dogs with eyes like saucers, no nose, the tongue hanging out at the side, too large for the mouth, white and tan if possible, and 2 years old. End quote. He goes on to say, my dogs are chosen, a species of Charles II's Spaniel intensified, and by the by there is so much genuine likeness that I think it probable that Merry Monarch was indebted to his marriage with a Portuguese princess for the original race of spaniels, as well as her dower of Bombay. End quote. There is another reason for believing that the King Charles was imported from Japan. There is a vulgar belief that the spaniel may be dwarfed in size by giving it gin, and possibly the supposed secret of producing lapdogs in Japan, the administration of sake, was brought over by the importer of dogs. These ignorant ideas are always traceable, and if the conformation of the King Charles and Japanese is so close, and the means of dwarfing them coincides in both countries, or rather is supposed to dwarf them, for it does not, and the dogs are not referable to the same stock, it is a very singular coincidence. End quote. Thus it will be seen that whatever the origin of the King Charles and Blenheim, they have led a somewhat checkered career, though both have at times been called by other names, and have occasionally waned in popularity. They are both ancient, and have maintained their existence in the canine world against frequent neglect on the part of the public, coming down to this more appreciative and dog-loving age in a remarkable state of purity, all things considered. Still, we have cause to regret deeply that these beautiful animals are not more popular today than they are. They are far more intelligent, affectionate, and beautiful than many of the other breeds that are so extensively sought after and cultivated as ladies' pets, and yet thousands of dog fanciers seem not to know this. The reason is that this is an age of crazes and fads, and it matters not how homely, how stupid, or how insipid a breed of dogs may be, if its manipulators can succeed in getting it said prominently that it is the fashionable breed of the day. The devotees of fashion, the faddists, to coin a word, will rush to the new kennels in search of the new breed, pay any price that may be asked for any specimen that may or may not be able to show a pedigree, and carry it away in triumph. Some of these people heave deep-drawn sighs of relief and exultation as they drive away with their treasure in their arms and exclaim, "How fortunate! How should I ever have survived if I had not succeeded in getting one of the first of these new pets?" The exultation is to be short-lived, however, for Madame may rest assured that next year, or the year after, or the year after that at the farthest, some new breed will be boomed and will become the craze. Then this pet that was secured at the cost of such fast driving and so large a roll of bills must be given away, and a strange idol must be erected in its place. The more practical, conservative, and level-headed people will, however, in time, come to disregard these sensational favorites, these passing crazes, and to value the brainy, silky-haired, bright-eyed, affectionate little spaniel as the most beautiful and lovable pet dog in the world. The time will come when Toy Spaniels will far outnumber the Italian Greyhound, the Poodle, the Mexican Hairless, the Yorkshire, or the Skye Terrier, not only in aristocratic and democratic homes, but on the show bench. The time will come when true merit and beauty will count for more than the mandates of Dame Fashion, and then the Spaniel will achieve his true and proper place in the estimation of dog lovers. What can be more loved or lovable in the canine world than the richly colored and richly coated Blenheim, or the large-eyed, somber-hued King Charles? Not alone in appearance are these dogs attractive, but their intellectual qualities attract to them all who come to know them. What, say you, intellect in a dog? Aye, verily, and far more of it in some dogs than in some people whom I know. I will not here go into an argument on this point. Abler pens than mine have laid down the reasons for this faith, and to them I refer all doubters. Speaking of the intellectuality of these dogs, I cannot do better than to quote again from Idstone, who says, quote, "I have seen extraordinary instinct developed in these spaniels. One, a dog in my possession in 1838, and until his death, was, from constant association with me and my friends, almost human, and as he held his head on one side, apparently endeavoring to fathom the meaning of conversation, it seemed as though he were almost prepared to join in it. On one occasion he was sleeping in the room where a lady to whom he was much attached was moaning in pain, and, waking up, he seemed at a glance to understand the emergency, and after a moment's consideration endeavored to pull the bell, though he had never before been taught to do so. Though impatient of strangers, he would at once permit the approaches of my friends at first sight, and, more singular still, he understood and appreciated a dislike I did not venture to express, and would always dive at the legs of a couple of new college chaplains toward whom I had no cordiality. How did he know this, I wonder, or how divine that I had a sincere respect for Dr. Pusey, to whom I never spoke in my life? But such was the case, I am sure, by his manner and gestures, which, however, the sage never noticed or acknowledged." End quote. One of the greatest pleasures to be derived from the ownership of a toy spaniel is in training him to perform various tricks, to carry notes, packages, etc., to persons in various parts of the house or grounds. They take up these tricks readily, and it is intensely interesting to watch the development of intelligence in a young spaniel under patient and practical tutorship. The method of this class of training is simple, and as it has been fully treated of under the proper heads by several of the contributors to this work, I need not here go into it. Anyone who engages in it, however, must find it a delightful task, and the pet once thoroughly educated will be a source of pleasure to his owner and of wonder to others as long as he lives. The following points are observed in judging toy spaniels. The head should be domed, and in good specimens is absolutely semi-globular, sometimes even extending beyond the half-circle and projecting over the eyes so as to nearly meet the upturned nose. The eyes are set wide apart, with the eyelids at right angles to the line of the face, not oblique or fox-like. The eyes themselves are large, lustrous, and very dark in color, so as to be generally considered black, the enormous pupils, which are absolutely of that color, increasing this tendency. From their large size, there is almost always a certain amount of weeping shown at the inner angles. This is owing to a defect in the lachrymal duct. The stop or hollow between the eyes is as well marked as in the bulldog, or even more so, many good specimens exhibiting a hollow deep enough to bury a small marble. The nose must be short and well turned up between the eyes, without any indication of artificial displacement afforded by a deviation to either side. The color of the end should be black, and it should be both deep and wide, with open nostrils. The lower jaw must be wide between its branches, leaving plenty of space for the tongue and for the attachment of the lower lips, which must completely conceal the teeth. It should also be turned up or finished, so as to allow of its meeting the end of the upper jaw. The ears must be long, so as to approach the ground. In an average-sized dog, they should measure 20 inches from tip to tip, and in some good specimens the length reaches 22 inches. Or even a trifle more. They should be set low on the head and be heavily feathered. In this respect, the King Charles is expected to exceed the Blenheim, and his ears occasionally extend to 24 inches. The most desirable size is about 10 pounds, but we often get fine specimens that weigh more than this. In compactness of shape, these spaniels nearly rival the pug, but the length of coat adds greatly to the apparent bulk, as the body, when the coat is wet, looks small in comparison to that of the pug. Still, it ought to be decidedly cobby, with strong, stout legs, broad back, and wide chest. We find many specimens weak in the loin and hind legs, but these are not good ones. The symmetry of the Toy Spaniels is of some importance, but it is seldom that there is any defect in this direction. The coat should be long, silky, soft, and wavy, but not curly. In the Blenheim there should be a profuse mane extending well down the front of the chest. The feathers should be well displayed on the ears and feet, where it is so long as to give the appearance of their being webbed. It is also carried well up the backs of the legs. In the King Charles, the feather on the ears is very long and profuse, exceeding in length that of the Blenheim by an inch or more. The feather on the tail, which is usually cut to the length of 3½ or 4 inches, should be silky and from 5 to 6 inches long, making a marked flag of a square shape and not carried above the level of the back. The color varies with the breed. The King Charles is a rich, glossy black and deep tan, without any white, tan spots over the eyes and on the cheeks, and tan markings on the legs. The Blenheim must on no account be whole-colored, but must have a ground of pure pearly white, with bright, rich chestnut or ruby-red markings, evenly distributed in large patches. The ears and cheeks are red, with a blaze of white extending from the nose up to the forehead and ending in a crescentive curve between the ears. In the center of the blaze there should be a clear spot of red, the size of a sixpence. The tricolor, or Charles I Spaniel, must have the tan of the King Charles, with markings like those of the Blenheim in black instead of red on a pearly white ground. The ears and under the tail must also be lined with tan. The tricolor has no spot, that mark of beauty being peculiarly the property of the Blenheim. The tricolor is now known as the Prince Charles. The red Toy Spaniels are known as the Ruby Spaniels, the points being the same as those of the King Charles, differing only in the matter of color, which should be entirely a rich chestnut or ruby red, the color of the nose to be black. Scale of points. King Charles. Symmetry, condition, and size, value 20. Head, 15. Stop, 5. Muzzle, 10. Eyes, 10. Ears, 15. Coat and feathering, 15. Color, 10. Total, 100. Blenheim. Symmetry, condition, and size, value 20. Head, 15. Stop, 5. Muzzle, 10. Eyes, 5. Ears, 10. Coat and feathering, 15. Color and markings, 15. Spot, 5. Total, 100. Among the prominent breeders of Toy Spaniels in this country may be mentioned Mr. A. W. Lucy, who has bred many good specimens. His Milwaukee Charlie, sired by imported Duke, is one of the best King Charles Spaniels ever bred in this country. Duke also sired Hayless, winner of first at Chicago, Rome, first at New York, and Prince, first at Boston. Other successful breeders are Miss Cameron, Mrs. Moody, Miss Phillips, and Mrs. Weston of New York, and Mr. F. B. Lucy and Mr. F. B. Fay of Boston, Mr. Mariner and Mr. R. W. Holmes of Milwaukee, and Mrs. L. D. McCord, No. 67, 37th Street, Chicago. One of the most successful breeders of Toy Spaniels in this country is Mrs. F. Senn of 278 West 11th Street, New York City. Her King Charles, Romeo, 9230, is a beautiful specimen. He won first in puppy class at New York, 1888, first and special at Philadelphia, 1889, and first at New York, 1890. He was whelped November 24th, 1887, and weighs 8 pounds. Her Blenheim King Victor, imported, has won 5 first and 2 champion prizes and has never been beaten. His weight is 12 pounds, and his color is lemon and white. He was formerly owned by Mr. William Phillips, who has probably shown more good spaniels than any other person in this country, and always winners. Among these may be named such fine specimens as the King Charles Roscius and the Blenheim King Pippin, both too well known to need any description here. This ends Section 46, The Toy Spaniels.
Section 47 of the American Book of the Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sherri Lothridge. The American Book of the Dog, G. O. Shields, editor. Section 47, The Schipperke, by E. R. Spalding. The Schipperke, by E. R. Spalding. One would-be canine authorities have recently asserted that the Schipperke is a mongrel of modern manufacture. This is not the case by any means. It is a distinct breed of remote though unknown origin. The breed is supposed to have originated in Belgium, though even this is not definitely known. Belgian fanciers, however, affirm that he has been known in that country for several centuries, and at least one writer affirms that they have been known in the Flemish towns for 300 years. The breed is not generally popular in Belgium, though a great favorite with certain classes, and good specimens are rare and high-priced. Mr. John Lyson of Antwerp, in a recent communication to the American Field, says of this dog, "They are always called Spits in Belgium. If you were to ask a dog dealer for a Schipperke dog, he wouldn't know what you were speaking about. The name Schipperke was given when a few fanciers got up the club, and when I asked later on the one who proposed it why they had not given the dog its proper name, he answered that the Pomeranian was already called Spitz in Germany, and moreover that a queer name would render the dog more attractive to foreigners. Considering the shape of head, the mane, and frill, I should think the Schipperke is related to the Pomeranian, which, notwithstanding its name, is principally bred in the surroundings of Cologne et La Chapelle and other places near the Belgian frontier. Until 3 years ago, the black tailless Spitz have been the dog of the working class of people, especially butchers, shoemakers, and also, not unfrequently, he was seen on the canal boats, whence they gave him the name of Schipperke, but he might as well claim the name of Beenhouwerk, little butcher, or Schoenmaker, little shoemaker. Until a year ago, and sometimes even now, when a wealthy man was taking a walk with his Spitz, he was looked at with inquiring eyes by all who passed him. The only ones which were allowed to live among gentlemen and ladies were the toy Spitz, and some were really very small and pretty. Now, however, the black pariah is becoming a favorite, and many a young gentleman takes a walk with his Spitz, which has taken the place of his late fox terrier. The head of the Schipperke much resembles that of the Pomeranian, a pair of small triangular ears carried perfectly straight and close to each other. The neck and shoulders are strong, and the hair is longer on these parts. But there must be no excess here, as many dogs have been bred and shown already with long, soft hair, thus losing entirely their true character. The body is rather short, and well-filled-up ribs give the little animal a cobby appearance. The Spitz stand on straight legs covered with short, smooth hair. The feet are small and round, cat feet, furnished with strong black toenails. Most of the good specimens have dew claws, but some judges want to get rid of them. With regard to the tail, much has been said, but Spits born perfectly tailless do exist, and in the opinion of all those who used to breed them years ago, a dog born with a tail on it is not a purebred one, and should not be kept for breeding. Many breeders of the present day, however, and I am sorry to say, judges even say, quote, "It's no use breeding them tailless, cut the tail off," end quote. But the only reason they could give for this is that they never succeeded in breeding a tailless one. It is a fact that out of 100 bred now, scarcely 20, or even less, will be tailless, but this, in my opinion, is only owing to the fact that the breed has not been kept pure, for on the other hand I have known a bitch who has never thrown any but tailless puppies, and that to different dogs. Schipperkes usually breed very true. For an instance of this, a friend of mine had a purebred bitch which a year ago was accidentally warded by a fox terrier. She threw 5 puppies, all coal black, bar a small white spot, on the breast of some of the toes. For general shape, everyone agrees, but for several points there is a great diversity of opinion. At first is to the length of hair. Some, with Mr. John Proctor, who is an Englishman living in Antwerp, and who has made Pick his type for the breed, want a long mane extending between the forelegs up to about half the body. Others, especially the breeders of Louvain, want an entirely smooth shiny coat dog with hardly any frill, and narrow ears about 1/2 longer than Pick's ears. With this sort of Spitz the head is longer also. Then again Brussels has her type of Spitz, much shorter in head, with large eyes, broad forehead, and usually large ears set far apart and low on the head. With this type there usually goes a fair hard-haired mane, and good coat, but unfortunately also all the dogs of this type are much out at the elbows, which, added to their square, short head, seem to show bulldog cross. The dog usually seen in Antwerp and surroundings is between these, and should become the only type admitting that the ears are perfect as well as the head. The mane does not appear large at first sight, but when passing the hand through it one is surprised at the length of the hair. There should be also a fair frill on the hindquarters, and hair of a fair length on the back, sides, and below, perfectly smooth, as well as on the legs. Much diversity of opinion exists as yet among breeders with regard to the secondary points, but it is to be hoped that within a few years everyone will recognize one type, and that it will be the right old stamp of Spitz. In America as well as in England, the Schipperke has recently become extremely popular, and the demand for good typical specimens is far in excess of the supply in both countries. On this account, some unprincipled dealers have picked up small mongrel dogs which they have crossed on either the black and tan terrier or the Spitz. The product of such crosses they have in some instances sold or palmed off on shows for true Schipperkes. Those crossed on the terrier have usually a soft coat, while those resulting from a Spitz cross usually have long wavy or curly hair. The true Schipperke breeds faithfully to type. 15 puppies have been produced under my observation, from 4 bitches and 2 dogs. All of these are solid black, have good coats, both as to length and texture are correct in form and size, have the fox head, the straight pricked ear, the small dark brown expressive eye, peculiar to the breed. Another eminent Belgian fancier of this breed writes, "The Schipperke is a tough, hardy, intelligent, attractive, and amusing little dog. He is useful about the house or barn as a vermin exterminator, is fond of attention, takes readily to amusing tricks, and is easily taught. He is extremely active, has a gay carriage, his temper is admirable, and no dog is more fond of children than he." This little dog, whom we meet with so often on our canal boats as a faithful guard, is distinguished by a character denoting great intelligence. On account of his attachment for master or mistress, his vigilance and obedience, his good temper toward children, his graceful and elegant gait and form, as well as his perfect cleanliness, he has become the favorite house dog. He is also a real demon for rats, mice, etc., which he pursues with great eagerness. The head approaches the type of the fox. The skull is wide and vaulted, diminishing before the eyes, and fining down toward the tip of the nose, which is small and black. The ears are about 2 1/2 inches long, are pricked and triangular in shape. The eyes are lively dark brown in color, and are placed rather forward than sideways, somewhat almond-shaped, but become more round when the dog is excited. The body is from 10 to 14 inches long, from rear to front of shoulder, and weight of grown males from 10 to 15 pounds. The animal stands well on his legs, is neither very stocky nor is he slim, is heavier in front than behind, and has a bold upright carriage. The back is straight from shoulder to hip, and ends somewhat like the rounded hind quarter of the guinea pig. A writer in a recent number of the Dog Owner's Annual has this to say of the breed. Among a few Belgian breeders there is some talk of more than one type of Schipperke. They enumerate the Antwerp and Louvain types, and one between. It is true that differences do exist. Some there are that have coarse terrier heads, leathery ears very wide at the base, and firmly set up bodies. These always look to me to require what they unmistakably once possessed a tail. This type has a very short coat and seldom any ruff. They are also rather large. Then there is a little sort with full eyes, head inclined to apple shape, hardly any muzzle, ears large, and at sides of head plenty of coat, not very harsh, plenty of ruff and fringe on thighs. A type between this is preferred, and as most of my best specimens have come from Antwerp, I am inclined to think that this town deserves to give its name to the type. The dog that is now accepted as representative weighs about 10 pounds, is a glossy black, stands up well on his pins with an air of vivacious alertness. He looks stoutly built in front and smaller behind, and his back ends like the rounded hindquarter of a guinea pig. His head is foxy like all the wild dog type. Ears small, narrow, pricked, and carried upright in parallel lines on the top of the head, not at the sides. Eyes small and dark and showing no white. Neck and shoulders look heavy, partly owing to the thick ruff. Legs straight and smooth, feet cat-like, coat very harsh, about an inch long on the back, very dense and weatherproof. On the thigh it should be fringy. The Belgians call the ruff, quote, crinière, end quote, and the fringe, quote, culottes, end quote. General appearance, smart and intensely vital. Temperament restless, full of curiosity, and overflowing with jealous affection. The tail question will be a troublesome one for some time to come. I am satisfied that the breed in its best days was tailless. In time mating was performed with no care or discrimination. Caudal appendages put in an appearance, but there are, to my certain knowledge, numbers of Schipperkes that have been born without a sign of a tail, and there are plenty of bitches which give birth to several such puppies in every litter. With judicious breeding and docking the breed will no doubt, in time, recover this characteristic. A majority of the puppies are born with a small tail, which, if left on, curls up somewhat like that of the pug. It is fashionable, and it becomes the style of the dog to have the tail docked when the puppy is quite young. The fringe of hair, or quote, culottes, end quote, is natural to the rump and thighs, gives the animal a neater appearance than that of any dog with a natural tail. In rare cases a puppy is born tailless. The chest is rather wide and is well furnished with coat, which is of about the same length as that on the neck and rather harsh to the touch. The hair on a grown dog should be 2 inches long and should be straight on top of the neck, standing up only when the dog is excited. On the sides and under part of neck it should be of about same length and should grow so as to give the appearance of a ruffle on the throat. The hair is shorter on the sides of the body, but nearly as long on the line of the back as the top of the neck. On the rump and thighs it should be as long as on the neck, and should grow so as to make a fringe over the stern and thighs. The forelegs should be straight and covered with straight hair. The feet should be round and cat-like. On hind legs the stifles curve forward and the hocks backward. The thighs are fringed with long hair to the hock. The coat should be rather firm and resisting to the touch, and lying straight on the head, ears, top of neck, sides, back, on forelegs, and on hind legs below the hock. No scale of points has yet been adopted for judging the Schipperke in this country. End of section number 47.
Section 48 of the American Book of the Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The American Book of the Dog by G.O. Shields, editor. Section 48, Some Canine Diseases and Their Remedies, by Dr. J. Frank Perry, Ashmont. Mange and eczema. There are two and but two kinds of mange, and although it is popularly considered common among dogs, such is not the case. It is comparatively rare, and what is generally mistaken for it is eczema. To the latter, man is also a frequent victim. Many people know it only by its old-fashioned name, salt rheum. It is important that dog owners be sufficiently familiar with the appearances presented in these three skin diseases so often confounded, and to distinguish between them. For each there is a distinct line of treatment, which is successful only in that special disease. Both forms of mange are purely local parasitic diseases, whereas eczema, in many instances, has a constitutional origin, and from this fact it readily appears how absolutely useless it would often be to apply the treatment of one to the other. The most common form of mange is the sacroptic, the actual existing cause of which is a minute and almost microscopic insect. This parasite draws nourishment from the skin and causes intense itching, which in turn incites scratching and develops the disease known as eczema. The male insect remains on or near the surface of the skin, while the female digs into the deeper and softer layers and burrows until she dies, which is generally in 3 or 4 months. Along the tunnel which she makes, she deposits one egg after another, blocking up the passage with them. The young are hatched in about 2 weeks. The number of eggs one female lays is nearly 50. As soon as the young are sufficiently developed and are released from the furrows, they run over the surface, and the females among them soon begin to tunnel like their mothers before them. The itching occasioned by these parasites is intolerable. Among the furrows made by them there forms first small pimples, which soon change to vesicles and pustules that discharge a bloody matter which dries into thick crusts. These practically close up the furrows, but the itching causes the sufferer to scratch, and the coverings are torn off by the nails and the young insects set free. Treatment is really the most effective means of diagnosis for the non-professional, unaccustomed to the use of the microscope, by which alone can all doubts be dispelled. Fortunately, the one popular application for all skin diseases of dogs is sulfur and lard, and this, when properly applied, will destroy the insect which causes sarcoptic mange. Without knowing just its action, almost every dog owner is familiar with this remedy, and when his pet gets to scratching, and the skin is torn in consequence, he uses the sulfur first of all remedies. He may not cure the dog of the eruption, but very often if the mange insect is present, he destroys that, and simply a case of eczema is left. Owing to the popularity of this treatment, there is much less sacroptic mange than there otherwise would be, and where it breaks out it is usually soon combated. Sulfur, when rightly used, is harmless. In making it into an ointment, the proportions should be about 1 teaspoonful of sulfur to a tablespoonful of lard. This can be best mixed with a case knife on a plate by a process of kneading. Before applying the ointment, it is always well to give the dog a warm bath. Excepting in the hottest weather, of course, he must remain in a warm room for several hours afterward. In fact, while under treatment, it would be well to keep the patient in warm quarters. If the skin is very raw, the rubbing in the bath and subsequently must be very gentle, otherwise the skin will be much inflamed. A bath of 10 or 15 minutes will suffice to soften the skin. Soap may be used to secure cleanliness. After the dog has been dried by the gentle use of towels, the ointment should be thoroughly rubbed into the skin, every part of the body, neck and even head where possible, being treated. This should be done every night for 10 days. If he is a house dog, he should be well washed every morning for obvious reasons, but the sulphur and lard should be applied again at night. If sarcoptic mange is present, the insects ought to all be destroyed by the 5th or 6th day. To continue the application is, however, advisable to make sure. After this treatment has been administered, one may be reasonably certain that his dog has not the form of mange in question, and if any eruption remains, the chances are it is eczema or the other form of mange, which will next be described. Everyone who has seen a case of what is known as barber's itch can readily understand the appearances presented by the least common form of mange, the follicular. This affection runs the same course, with identically the same phenomena as is observed in the parasitic psychosis of the human race. Again, it is known that follicular mange in the dog, and a kindred disease in the cat, has been communicated to man, and in him given rise to parasitic psychosis. Further proof of the analogy of these diseases has been presented by the microscope. Under it there has been found, on the roots of the hairs drawn from a dog suffering from follicular mange, the same form of parasite which causes parasitic psychosis in man. It is evident that, with but one exception, writers on canine diseases have been satisfied to accept, unquestioned, an old theory that the form of mange under consideration was caused by an animal parasite called the Acurus follicularum, which is identical with a parasite bearing the same scientific name in man. This harmless animal, known as the pimple mite, everyone is familiar with, having pressed them from the face and nose, enclosed in little cylinders of cheese-like substance with black heads, the latter being accumulations of dust and dirt. Owing to their resemblance to maggots, these deposits, the natural contents of the sebaceous glands, are considered worms by the ignorant, who denominate them skin or face worms. Now, instead of an animal parasite being the cause of follicular mange, for the reason given, there is every reason to believe that the form of the parasite present is a vegetable one, a mold fungus, which attaches itself to the roots of the hair and does the mischievous work. The appearances presented in follicular mange are these. There is first an inflammation about the roots of a larger or smaller number of hairs, usually but few show the affection in the beginning. The skin around the affected hairs feels hot to the touch, is red and slightly swollen. Then pimples form in this region. The hairs soon fall out, and pustules appear. These latter are flat and run together. They soon discharge their contents, and scabs are formed. They in turn harden, crack open, and bleed slightly. When once the disease appears, it extends rapidly. The animal becomes repulsive, not only in appearance, but it gives off an exceedingly offensive odor. There is little, if any, itching. The pain from the eruption is considerable. Any portion of the body may be attacked, but the affection usually appears first on the head. The general health, as might be expected, soon suffers, and there is rapid loss of weight with progressive debility. Follicular mange can be cured, but improvement, even under the best treatment possible, is slow, and recovery is obstinately resisted. When once the disease has made much progress, the chances are that it will take 6 or 8 months to cure it. Besides the eruption, the loss of hair causes great disfigurement. If a cure is accomplished, the hair will grow again, but a long time will elapse before it does so. If a dog not highly prized be attacked with this disease, and it has made a considerable progress, it would be the humane act to put him out of the way. The necessary treatment few would care to undertake unless the dog be a valuable one, because frequent washings and applications must be made. Those who do not love their pets well enough to give them the best of care ought to sacrifice them at once if attacked with this loathsome form of mange. To the credit of dog owners be it said that even this misfortune would not be sufficient to induce many of them to take such a step. Therefore, the treatment demanded for the disease will be advised. Here it will be well to say that, for obvious reasons, it is best for every one to carefully examine his dog once a day, and if he finds an eruption resembling at all follicular mange, he should apply treatment without delay. If there are only 2 or 3 affected spots, let him obtain from his druggist a mixture made up of Canada balsam and carbolic acid, of each 1 or 2 drachms. Into this, dip a wooden toothpick, and what remains deposited on it rub well into the affected spot. Treat each pustule in this way, and afterward generously dust on dry sulfur. As a rule, this application will kill the disease at the particular points. As new pustules appear, let them be treated in the same way. This disease is rarely discovered early. More often it has made considerable headway before attention is attracted to it. When this is the case, clip the hair closely around the eruption and wash the dog quickly with the strongest form of carbolic soap. Rinse with clear water. Before doing this, however, if crusts have formed, linseed oil or lard should be freely used the night before to soften them. After washing, apply the balsam and carbolic acid as described, but it will not do to make the application over too great a surface at any one time for fear of poisonous absorption. On a large dog, one might safely apply a thin coating of the remedy to a spot the size of a silver dollar. Having done so, he should wait 2 or 3 hours and attack another spot, then again wait, and so on. In this way, in a day or 2, the entire eruption, even if extensive, can be acted upon. After the pustule has been touched with the balsam and acid and been dusted as recommended, no further treatment at this point is as a rule needed, for rapid healing takes place. If the case is a severe one and there is need to wash the sufferer from time to time, all badly inflamed spots which appear after the operation should be touched as advised. Lice, fleas, etc., and in fact everything which comes in contact with the skin and sets a dog to scratching, are numbered among the local causes of eczema. It is also induced by heat and moisture, hence long-haired dogs almost always suffer more or less from it in hot weather. Even water will provoke it if entered too often. Again, there are a variety of medicines which, when applied to the skin, bring out an eczemaceous eruption. Nearly all stimulating liniments contain ammonia, turpentine, or arnica, which will do this, so also will kerosene oil. Hunting dogs, which are much in their kennels and only taken out occasionally, and then given hard runs, during which they sweat excessively, are quite likely to have eczema. Of constitutional causes which may give rise to eczema, there are many, but unfortunately they are not so well understood as the local ones already described. Probably to errors in feeding is the disease most often due. Since redeeming from his wild state, the dog has been fed on a diet into which vegetables and starchy foods have entered largely. Perhaps if the proper portion of them and of meat could be determined, a mixed diet would be found best suited to him, but as a result of experience, it is evident that his diet should contain an excess of meat. When such is not the case, we find him, as a rule, showing in some way its need. When fed largely on starchy foods, some dogs, it is true, seem to keep in good condition, but many others on such a diet sooner or later show that they are below the standard of health. They are not only less strong and enduring, but are generally the victims of some ailment, and usually of the digestive system. Why those organs are most often affected is not difficult to understand. While starchy foods may furnish nearly all the elements necessary to supply tissue waste and keep active the vital processes, many of them are not rich in such, and with most of them too large quantities must be eaten to obtain all the essentials to support nutrition. To make clear the meaning of this statement, we will instance one of man's popular foods and its nutritive value. Eggs contain all the elements needed to sustain him, but if they were alone depended upon, the large number necessary to supply one important nutritive principle would overload the system with other elements. Hence, of course, if one limited himself strictly to an egg diet, he would die, although he obtained therefrom all his system actually needed in the way of support. It will appear from the foregoing that if a dog is given too much starchy food, he is quite certain, sooner or later, to have dyspepsia, which trouble is one of the most common causes of eczema. Some have thought an excess of meat capable of exciting this skin affection. Evidently, the theory is inferential, drawn from the effect of such a diet on man. It certainly creates in him an eczemaceous tendency, but there is no reason to believe that it has the same effect on the dog. Far from it. Meat is so essential in the treatment of eczema, it must be considered a remedial agent of the first importance. Not only is what is known as dyspepsia a cause of the disease in question, but all disturbances of the stomach and intestines are capable of producing it. Dogs are singularly subject to worms, which, while not causing any special trouble in some instances, yet in others give rise to quite serious symptoms, and to them eczema is often due. Poverty of the blood is not uncommon in dogs, and it is quite sure to exist in those which have for a considerable time been improperly fed. It shows itself in the mucous membranes, and these, instead of being of the rich red color, are pale. Eczema naturally occurs in such cases as a complication. It also often appears in young puppies and their dams. It is liable to come on in the course of any disease which runs the dog low in flesh and strength. In fact, whenever the general health is impaired, whatever be the cause, an eruption of eczema is likely to occur. That the disease is hereditary, there is good reason to believe. It does not necessarily follow that if a sire or dam has had eczema, it must necessarily be carried on to the next generation. One would not expect this if the disease were due purely to local causes, such as parasites, but when constitutional in either parent, then the chances are that the progeny will show a decided tendency to the affection. Whether the seeds of the disease or whether the conditions of the system which invite its occurrence are transmitted is not, of course, known. But this fact is settled. A puppy with an eczemaceous sire or dam is likely to be marked with the same defect, and if he is as the result of hereditary taint, then he is comparatively worthless, for in him the disease will always be intractable, and if removed it will be especially liable to return. This fact should be given due weight in purchasing dogs. Both local and internal treatment are demanded in eczema. If it is due to parasites, fleas, mange, etc., then those troubles must be removed, and when they are, the eczema is very likely to disappear of itself. In many cases, it is difficult to determine just what the internal cause is which excites it. If it can be made out, treatment should, of course, be directed to its removal. When in doubt, the following general line of treatment should be followed. Feed the dog largely on meat, and at least once a day give him a little raw after he has taken his other food. If thin in flesh, cod liver oil is recommended, and the dose for one of the largest breeds of dogs is 1 tablespoonful 3 times daily, mixed with his food if he will take it so. If not, it should be poured into him clear. Dogs which are too fat frequently have eczema, and in such cases, of course, the quantity of food should be restricted and more exercise enforced. In the local treatment, frequent washings have an important place. The soaps used should not be irritating. Pure Castile and carbolic soaps are the best. If the skin is much inflamed, the former should be selected. In washing, one must be very gentle, for hard rubbing is sure to make the disease worse. After being carefully dried, if the eruption covers a large surface, sulfur and lard, a teaspoonful of the former to a tablespoonful of the latter should be gently applied. There are many other applications which would be more efficacious, but none are as safe, considering the fact that the animal is sure to lap off much of anything put on. This simple external treatment, when combined with the internal already advised, if faithfully persisted in, will often effect a cure. Eczema is not contagious, but in certain stages where there is much fluid thrown out by the eruption, the disease can be communicated by actual contact. A sound dog sharing the kennel of one affected is very likely to contract it. This is one reason why eczema is so liable to be mistaken for mange. In brief, how can one distinguish between sarcoptic mange, eczema, which is liable to be confounded, and follicular mange? This is by no means easy. In the first 2 diseases mentioned, there is intense itching, while in the last it is slight or wholly absent. There is a decided difference in the appearance of the eruption, but a non-professional is scarcely likely to note it, so other distinctive symptoms must suffice. Follicular mange is a rapidly progressive disease. Loss of weight is quickly evident. The pustules, as described, are peculiar, and again there is the offensive odor, which is not a symptom in either of the other diseases noted. The sulfur treatment, which is curative in the other forms of mange, has little or no effect whatever in this. Distemper. The belief that every dog must have this disease is a popular one, as is the delusion that every child is fated to suffer from scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, and the like. As in all infectious diseases, distemper is preventable and might be stamped out of existence, but its nature, the ways in which it is transmitted, and the essential means of prevention are but little understood by the average dog owner. Considering these facts, also that it is highly infectious, it is not surprising that a large proportion of dogs sometime in their lives fall victims to this malady. Distemper never occurs in a dog unless he takes it directly or indirectly from another dog suffering from it. In other words, for every case of the disease there must be a previous case, as is true of smallpox, typhoid fever, scarlet fever, measles, and many other infectious diseases peculiar to the human race. It has long been held that distemper is a germ disease. To Mr. Everett Mallet of London is due the high honor of substantiating this theory. This painstaking investigator carried out a series of bacteriological observations and experiments and proved that the disease is due to the presence of one or more microorganisms. Many writers have likened distemper to typhoid fever of man, and yet there is no close analogy between them. It far more closely resembles typhus fever, which evidently belongs to the same class of diseases as distemper, and the essential germs of each appear to be transmitted and propagated in much the same manner. Again, the incubation period, the febrile stage, the duration, the self-limitation, and many characteristic symptoms are alike peculiar to both. If a dog has distemper, he can communicate it to another dog which comes in contact with him, but there is good reason for believing that actual contact is not necessary for the transmission of the disease, and that the specific germ or microbe attaches itself to various substances, and in this way is transported. If the drinking or feeding basin, blanket, bedding, collar, or even chain in use by the sufferer from distemper be put into the kennel of a sound dog who has not had the disease, the chances are many that he will become infected. The germs cling tenaciously to woodwork, and the portable benches used in dog shows are held to be peculiarly favorable to contagion, more especially because it is difficult to thoroughly disinfect them, and where a large number of dogs meet at bench shows, distemper germs are extremely likely to find entrance. They may be conveyed by a victim of the disease in its commencing stage, or they may be introduced by an unaffected dog in his hair, blanket, crate, or some other belonging from a kennel in which the disease is raging or has recently existed. Considering this fact, bench shows are rightly held to be a menace to puppies. Age appears to lessen the susceptibility to the disease, and matured dogs are much less liable to become infected than those in early life. The symptoms of distemper begin to present themselves in from 4 to 14 days after exposure to contagion. Generally, the first noted are dullness, a disinclination to exertion, partial loss of appetite, and chilly sensations, which are indicated by shiverings. Then rapidly follow the manifestations of a common cold, sneezing, dry, husky cough, and a discharge from the nose and eyes. The discharge is at first purulent, gluing the eyelids together and drying around the nostrils in crusts. There is also more or less fever, which is noticeable when the back of the hand is placed between the thighs. If the attack is severe, the animal grows duller and more indifferent, he does not rouse easily, and when on his feet is listless and hangs his head. He may walk about a little, but soon tires, lies down, and dozes off into an unquiet sleep. Every part of his system is involved by the disease. Vomiting is not uncommon. Diarrhea is a frequent symptom, the result of inflammation of the bowels, to which there is a marked tendency in this affection. Inflammation of the air passages is also characteristic of it, and is indicated by cough and quickened breath. Complications are liable to occur in distemper, therefore its course can never be anticipated with certainty. If favorable, the dog begins to show a little improvement in the course of a week, and recovery is complete at the end of the 3rd week. In cases running to a fatal termination, death usually occurs before the 15th day. Other symptoms than these frequently appear, but to describe them would be to invite confusion, and we purposely confine ourselves to those which can be considered typical. The victim of distemper should be put into a room by himself. It should be dry and well ventilated. Pure air is of the greatest importance. In cold weather, a fire will be needed in the room, which should not, however, be kept too warm. The air within should be impregnated with some disinfectant. Chloride of lime is as good as any. It owes its merit to the free chlorine gas which it contains and gives off slowly into the air. To the germs of disease it is something of an enemy, although not a powerful one. To have any decided effect in distemper, it must be used freely, and large pans or shallow boxes should be filled with it and placed about the room. The animal should be kept quiet and not encouraged to move around much. A constant supply of pure drinking water is essential. It is a matter of the greatest consequence that the patient be well nourished, and this fact should be kept in view from the first. During the early stage of the disease, the patient is likely to eat sparingly of milk or broths, and what is taken voluntarily, if in any considerable quantity, will suffice. After 2 or 3 days, the appetite will probably nearly, if not entirely, disappear. Generally, the last food to be refused is raw beef, which is allowable if scraped and given in quantities of 1 or 2 tablespoons every 2 hours. Total loss of appetite may sooner or later be expected in the majority of cases, in which event nourishment must be administered by force, judgment, of course, being used in estimating the quantity necessary to support the strength. Milk and lime water and strong beef tea are mainly to be relied upon. About a cupful of either should be poured down the patient's throat at least 4 times a day, and oftener if he is rapidly losing flesh and strength. Raw eggs are easy of digestion. 1 may be added to each cupful of beef tea or milk, if these agents alone do not appear to be sufficiently supportive. Beef tea and meat liquids of a kindred nature can properly be considered restorative and stimulant, but not nutritive. It is popularly supposed that in making them, the nourishing qualities of the meat are extracted by the water, and that the dry, hard remnant of meat fiber which remains undissolved is exhausted of its nutritive properties. This is almost always thrown away, and thus the most valuable constituents are sacrificed, and the liquid which is carefully preserved contains so little in the way of sustenance that it is almost worthless. The remnant actually contains nearly all the real virtue of the meat. If this be reduced to a paste by pounding in a mortar, and is then added to the liquid in which it is cooked, beef tea so prepared is not only highly nourishing, but is also easy of digestion. The criticisms on beef tea, as commonly made, apply equally to extracts of meat and meat juices, and to similar preparations for sale by druggists. They are all devoid of the so-called albuminous constituents, the nutritious elements. It should also be remembered that beef tea is slightly laxative, therefore it should be withheld if a dog has diarrhea. As long as the patient appears to be doing well under this dietetic treatment, it will, of course, be unmistakable evidence of its efficacy. If the case is a desperate one, signs of failure will be plainly evident after the first week. When the diet already advised does not sustain him, stimulants must be resorted to, and if the owner is in doubt whether or not they are needed, he should assume the affirmative and give them. Unless the case is urgent, he should begin with 1 or 2 teaspoonfuls of sherry wine, adding the same to each cupful of food. After a day or two, the quantity of wine should be increased to a tablespoonful. If failure of strength and emaciation are progressive, brandy must be substituted for the sherry wine, and the doses gradually increased as before. In cases of simple distemper, excessive stimulation will rarely indeed be indicated. It is where other diseases occur during its course that it is most often needed. The discharge from the nose and eyes should never be allowed to accumulate, but should be removed with a sponge wet with a solution of borax and water. Constipation is an occasional symptom and is far less to be feared than diarrhea. To overcome the former, an injection of soap suds is all that can be safely administered. Cathartics, as a rule, are dangerous. If there is constipation, it is best to give an injection every 2 or 3 days to obviate the tendency to brain trouble, which exists in all severe cases. When beef tea and milk are vomited, scraped raw beef should be relied upon. It should be rolled up in the hand and given in pill form. Even this is sometimes vomited. If so, the nourishment for a time should be limited to the whites of raw eggs, which practically require no digestion and are almost immediately absorbed by the stomach. A tablespoonful or more may be given every hour. If vomiting still persists, 20 grains of the subnitrate of bismuth should be given every 3 or 4 hours. It can be mixed with the whites of eggs. No remedy has ever yet been discovered which will arrest distemper. The disease is self-limited and must run its course. Recovery may be expected if no accidents in the way of complications occur. In other words, distemper in itself is not a very fatal disease, and the greatest danger to be apprehended is from associate diseases developed during its course. In the way of treatment, the first essential is good nursing, and that is really about all that is needed to pull the majority of patients through. In fact, were it solely depended upon, infinitely fewer deaths would occur in distemper. Drugging, however, is the rule, and undoubtedly a large portion of the dogs which die with this disease are actually killed by the indiscriminate use of medicines. It is absolutely impossible to define, with anything like clearness, a medicinal treatment for distemper. No remedy should be addressed to the disease itself, but where one is used, it should be to control unfavorable symptoms which have arisen. In other words, it is the patient, not the disease, which should be treated, and while in some instances drugs assist much, they alone can never cure. Another thing, non-professionals are on dangerous ground while using them. The best advice which we can give is confine your treatment to nursing. Unfortunately, however, there are many who have an overweening confidence in drugs and will insist upon using them, so we shall briefly consider the medicinal treatment most often needed, hoping by so doing to prevent dosing at random. If a dog, when first attacked, has high fever, the following may be given: tincture of aconite root, 30 drops, chlorate of potassium, 1 dram, sweet spirit of nitre, 1 ounce, water, 2 ounces. Of this, the dose for the dog of large size is 1 teaspoonful once in 2 hours while the fever is intense. As soon as it subsides, the medicine should be discontinued. It would be better in every instance to stop it at the end of the 2nd day, if not earlier. Subnitrate of bismuth in 20-grain doses acts well in irritable stomach and may be given in persistent vomiting, as already advised. In rare cases, there is exhaustive diarrhea. If so, a teaspoonful of paregoric may be administered once in from 4 to 6 hours. If there are no more than 5 or 6 discharges each day, no treatment will be required. In fact, a slight loosening of the bowels is salutary. When the patient's strength appears to be failing and enforced feeding is necessary, it will be well to give a 1-grain quinine pill 4 times a day. This is all the medicinal treatment which we can properly advise. Again, we say to him who is unfortunate and has a distemper patient to care for, depend upon nursing and use drugs only when their need is absolute. After convalescence commences, the patient should still be kept quiet. In giving him a more generous diet as he improves, let it be done gradually, for to bring on a relapse is always easy. About the time the disease ends and recovery commences, an eruptive skin disease usually appears. It is a favorable sign. Chorea, or twitching of certain muscles, usually of the legs, is a common after-effect of distemper. It is a very obstinate affection, and treatment is rarely successful. There are no drugs which can be relied upon to overcome it, therefore dosing is not justifiable. As the patient's general health improves, the trouble in question may lessen. Whether it does so or not, he should not be punished with medicines, for, as we have said, they will do him no good. Worms. Worms are a common enemy to dogs, and no small % of puppies die from this cause. As to how they become infested, there are many popular theories, the generally accepted one being through the milk fed to them after having been weaned. Why cow's milk should be accused of being the means of conveyance, or what there is about it to create worms, no one seems to know. It is one of those delusions, without a grain of truth, which have been handed down from generation to generation, and, like all others such, is hard to dispel. Cow's milk, either fresh or boiled, never causes worms in dogs, and hence can always safely be given to them. The worm which occasions young dogs the most trouble is the lumbricoid, a round worm resembling the common earthworm, or what country boys call the angleworm. It varies in length, being from 2 to 6 inches, and is of a pale pink color, perfectly round in shape, and tapers toward each extremity. Probably the tapeworm is the one which troubles old dogs the most. Although there are fully a score or more different forms of worms which infest the canine race, at least 3/4 of it are troubled with them. These 2 varieties are all that is necessary for us to consider. For the treatment, the point we shall dwell upon is much the same in all cases. Roundworms sometimes come up into the stomach and are vomited, but more often they are passed downward. When they are present in a small proportion of cases, they do not give rise to any marked symptoms, but as a rule they cause no little disturbance, and that they do sometimes give rise to convulsions, chorea, paralysis, and certain other serious affections of the nervous system is a well-known fact. Frequently puppies, and much less often old dogs, partially lose the power of their hind legs and rapidly recover as soon as a discharge of the worms occurs. In a puppy, usually the first symptoms of worms to attract attention is great abdominal distension or bloating. No sooner does he begin to eat than this is noticed, and it is all out of proportion to the amount of food taken. There is also usually some diarrhea and wormy discharges, which are largely of mucus, rusty in color, as though mixed with powdered brick dust. These symptoms may be the only noticeable ones, or there may be present others indicative of indigestion. Vomiting is not unusual, and although the appetite is generally voracious, the animal is almost always thin in flesh. In puppies over 3 or 4 months old, if infested by worms, the nose would very likely be hot and dry, the breath offensive, and there might be a cough as a direct consequence. A rough, dry, harsh coat is also a sign of worms, and the sleep of an older puppy harboring them is usually dreamy and disturbed, as evinced by nervous twitchings and occasional moaning or barking. Worms in puppies but 2 or 3 weeks old excite colicky pains, which cause the little ones to groan constantly and with almost every breath. When an attack comes on, they are soon powerless to move the body, and for hours lie numb and cold, their piteous groaning never ceasing until just before they die. Occasionally, by prompt treatment, one is saved from this condition, but such good luck is rare indeed. Besides the symptoms already described, which are occasioned by worms in older puppies, there are many others, and so varied are they, the average dog owner feels justified, and rightly so, in giving worm medicine in all instances where the pet is taken ill, and he cannot make out the cause of the trouble. This speculative treatment is often successful, and in no case is it likely to do harm if the proper medicine is used. There can be no doubt but nursing puppies become infested by worms in this way. The dam has about her the eggs from which the worms are propagated, in her hair, etc. They are taken up by the puppies while nursing, and enter the stomach with the milk. There they meet the conditions favorable for their development. Just what conditions are required for that are not known, but there is reason to believe that mucus is specially essential. The inside of the intestines of young puppies is thickly coated with mucus, and owing to the character of the food which they live on during the first 5 or 6 weeks of life, this coating is but little affected, and much of it remains, or at least there is always what appears to be in excess. When the puppies begin to take solid food, in its passage through the intestinal canal it carries mucus with it, and less is left within. It is then that the puppies begin to free themselves of their pests. This fact is generally recognized and taken advantage of. Breeders, as a measure against worms, change the diet from liquid to solid as soon as the latter can be born. Those who have successfully treated puppies for worms have doubtless been surprised at the large number expelled. They multiply with marvelous rapidity. Eschright estimates, in the body of the female lumbricoid found in the intestines of man, the number of eggs to be 64 million. These eggs, after being discharged, retain their vitality for many months, and if they are so deposited that they can be taken up either in the food or drinking water, worms are propagated from them in the intestinal canal of the victim. Sour milk is believed to be a preventative for worms, and many breeders feed it to their puppies at least once a day. Charcoal is considered to possess vermifuge properties and is also given. Probably both have a salutary action, but it cannot be a powerful one. For puppies from but 3 to 5 weeks old, the safest remedy for worms is the fluid extract of pinkroot and senna. 5 drops may be given once a day for 3 or 4 days on an empty stomach. At the end of that time, a teaspoonful of castor oil should be administered to clear out the intestinal canal. For worms in puppies 3 months old and upward, and matured dogs, the best remedy is areca nut, or betel nut, as it is called. In purchasing this, choose the dark-colored nuts and grate them on a nutmeg grater. The dose is from a teaspoonful to a tablespoonful, according to the size of the animal. If the patient is a puppy, he should be fed milk only for supper the night before taking the medicine, which should be given the next morning on an empty stomach and followed 2 hours afterward with a generous dose of castor oil. It is easier to administer the areca nut if it is mixed with just enough lard, butter, or molasses to have it hold together in pill form. To give it, grasp the muzzle of the dog with the left hand, the thumb and forefinger on either side, pressing in the upper lip so as to cover the teeth and prevent biting. The mouth being opened and head up, carry the pill back into the throat as far as possible, and leaving it on the roots of the tongue, close the jaws and keep them together until the dog swallows. If he does not do this at once, pinch his nostrils as you would a baby's. Shutting off the breath will be successful. Old dogs frequently have tapeworms, of which there are several varieties. Probably dogs which are fed largely on raw meat are the most common victims. In brief, the way in which they become infested is this. Every tapeworm generates eggs which contain the germ from which other tapeworms are developed. Now these are thrown out of the body. If they are ever taken up again and enter the stomach of a suitable animal, their envelopes are softened and ruptured, and the germs, or embryos, are set free. In some way or other, these leave the intestinal canal and make their way to different parts of the body, meeting conditions favorable to their development. If the flesh in which they are fixed is eaten by another animal, they will, when they reach his intestinal canal, fasten themselves to the mucous membrane and develop into tapeworms. This method of transition is rather intricate, but can be made clearer by the following illustration. The egg from a tapeworm of a dog is so deposited that in time it is taken up by a sheep. In the body of this it finds the conditions necessary for its development and growth, and becomes what is known as a conorus cerebralis, a parasite found in the sheep's brain. Let this be eaten by a dog, and in his intestines it will become a tapeworm. If one dog in a kennel has a tapeworm, he may infect all his mates, and he may even keep continually infecting himself in this way. The eggs from him are deposited about, and he takes them up on the hairs of his coat. If he is unfortunate enough to have lice, which are common among dogs, these eggs are swallowed by them. Within the bodies of the lice, the eggs meet with the conditions which favor the rupture of their envelopes, and the embryos escape, and another transformation takes place. In biting the parts irritated by them, the lice are often swallowed by the dog, and thus the germ enters and is developed into a perfect tapeworm in the intestinal canal, which it left as an egg but a few weeks previous. The same infested lice being shaken from his coat into the drinking water or the food may be introduced into other dogs kennelled with him, and they in turn become infested. A generously fed dog, which seems strong, active, and healthy, and yet keeps thin, might well be suspected of having a tapeworm, especially if he has a ravenous appetite. Whether he has worms or not ought to be easy to determine. When the owner is in doubt, he should give him worm medicine to settle the question. The form which he is most likely to harbor is of a delicate character, much of it being thread-like. It is from 10 to 20 inches in length. The largest tapeworm found in the dog may reach 10 feet in length, and the germ from which it is propagated is derived from the sheep. Another form is furnished by the hare and rabbit. This worm is from 3 to 2 feet in length. A safe agent, and one quite effectual in the treatment of tapeworm, is the areca nut, and a tablespoonful at least should be given to a dog of ordinary size. He should fast 1 day before taking it. On the night of that day he should be given a dose of castor oil to clear out the intestinal canal and leave the worm free to be acted upon by the medicine, which should be administered the following morning. 2 hours later another dose of castor oil should be given if it appears to be needed. Quite recently, coconut as a remedy for tapeworm in man has been given some prominence. In most of the cases in which it has been tried, it has acted exceedingly well. No reason appears why it should not prove as effective in the treatment of the same trouble in dogs. The way of giving the nut, which suggests itself as the best, is to crush its meat in an iron mortar, such as druggists have. It can then be administered to the dog with a spoon, and the milk be poured into him from a bottle. Another bitter enemy to the tapeworm is infusion of pomegranate root. This, like all other vermifuges, should be given after fasting for 24 hours. The dose for dogs of the largest breeds is 3 ounces, 6 tablespoonfuls. It is best to commence the treatment by giving castor oil. 2 hours afterward, the dose of the infusion stated should be given and repeated every 2 or 3 hours until 4 doses have been taken. Then the oil should be repeated. These several measures have been described for the reason that sometimes a tapeworm proves obstinate, and one remedy after another must be tried before its resistance can be overcome. When an unsuccessful effort has been made to dislodge the parasite, it will be well to repeat it in about 2 weeks. A word further regarding the prevention of worms in young puppies. At as early an age as possible, they should be given solid food, or food in a form approaching it. Toasted bread crushed up in broths, or finely powdered dog biscuits in the same, furnish means of clearing out the intestinal canal, and of preventing, in a great measure, worms from attaching themselves to its walls. The dietetic remedy is by far the most effectual and the safest. Vermin. Dogs are scarcely ever entirely free from fleas. There are 2 kinds of these pests, the common flea and the sand flea. The former bites, producing an eruption much like that caused on man by mosquitoes, while the latter bores into the skin, exciting quite extensive inflammation. The sand fleas, as the name implies, are common in sandy districts and are very hard to kill. Some persons suffer from them almost as much as do the dogs, they producing on them urticaria, a disease commonly known as nettle rash and hives. Kennels infested with fleas, if they are situated in the sand, should be moved to a foundation of black earth, or if this is impossible, earth should be drawn, and the floors and the surrounding ground be covered with it. Afterward, the kennels and the dogs should be treated to kill the pests if possible. New remedies for fleas are constantly being recommended, but without doubt the surest one is the Dalmatian insect powder. Certainly, on the score of cleanliness and the ease with which it can be used, there is nothing better for the purpose. If blown into all the cracks and plentifully thrown over the floor of the kennel, for a time at least, the nuisance will be abated. To treat a dog for fleas, lay him on several newspapers, dust the powder over him freely, and then work it with the hand well in among the hairs. The newspapers are an economical measure. If this treatment is applied properly, it means death to the troublesome insects. The powder recommended, when purchased in small quantities, is quite expensive. Much can be saved by buying it by the pound. Quite a sure means of ridding a dog of fleas is washing with strong carbolic soap suds. This can, if due caution is exercised, be safely done in summer, but in winter washing is rather hazardous. Of carbolic soaps there are at least two kinds, the strong and the mild. The latter is for toilet purposes, while the former is specially prepared for use on animals, and is really the only one possessing any actual virtue as a destroyer of parasites. In using carbolic acid in any form, one must never forget its poisonous nature. When washing a dog with soap containing it, let it be done quickly and he be well rinsed off without a moment's unnecessary delay. Dogs often harbor lice, and breeders find no little trouble in keeping them from puppies. On the latter, they give rise to a form of inflammation of the skin, which leads to the accumulation of many small, thin scales. A dog may be washed with carbolic soap, which will kill the lice, but it would scarcely be safe to use that on very young puppies with sufficient freedom to accomplish the purpose. It is best for 2 or 3 days to anoint them every day with sulphur and lard, quite a generous quantity, and then to wash them using the ordinary yellow soap of the kitchen. The lard softens the scales so they are easily detached from the skin, and with the sulphur heals the eruption. Sulphur is an enemy, although not a bitter one, to lice. If this treatment does not prove effectual, then the infested puppy must be washed every 3 or 4 days in strong carbolic soap suds. There will be but little danger in doing so if it is done quickly. Kerosene or crude petroleum will kill both lice and fleas, but these remedies cannot take precedence over those already advised, and besides they are exceedingly unpleasant to use. The importance of cleanliness in a dog and his belongings is of infinite importance. It is always well to occasionally burn sulphur in his kennel during winter, when whitewashing is out of the question. This will destroy all the vermin in it. As an extra precaution against these pests, it is always well to scatter about freely on the floor some disinfectant in a powdered form. There are many such, which are made up of carbolic acid and lime. On the powder, put sawdust, and on that lay plenty of clean straw, which should be changed once or twice a week. The care and feeding of puppies. Dogs in their wild state were carnivora, or flesh-eaters. In domestication they have met with new conditions, which have changed somewhat their natures. While meat is still an absolute essential to their diet, they do well if vegetable food is added in a limited quantity. Here it is well to say that there is a popular idea that by feeding dogs meat they are made savage. The great majority of dog owners and breeders say that this is not true, and yet there is a grain of truth in it. A diet largely made up of meat tends to develop the animal in man and bring out his coarser qualities of mind. It really makes him peevish and exacting, if not morose. So, too, with the dog. It really does tend to make him savage, but not in the degree people generally suppose, nor are its effects nearly as marked as on man. If a dog is naturally ferocious, his owner is quite sure to keep him much of the time chained up, and as a direct consequence of that restraint he is made much worse. Fed largely on meat, a dog which is humanely treated and allowed much liberty, and such a diet will never injure his disposition, even in the slightest degree. A puppy should be fed 4 times a day until he is 4 months old. From that period until the 7th month, 3 meals a day will be sufficient. Then, until a year old, he need be given food only morning and night. The last meal of the day should be the heaviest. While very young, milk should be his principal food. Here is a diet table for a puppy of the large breed, 8 weeks old. First meal, 7 a.m., milk, warmed. Put into it 1/2 a dog biscuit, which has been grated fine on a nutmeg grater. This should be scalded before it is added to the milk, of which there should be about a cupful. Second meal, 11 a.m., milk alone. Third meal, 4 p.m., well-cooked oatmeal and milk. Fourth and last meal of the day, from 9 to 9:30 p.m., beef, tea, and bread. To prepare this, put the meat, cut fine, into a tin can or vessel shaped like one. After water in sufficient quantity, about a pint to the pound, has been added, cover and put the can into a pan of water and set it away in a hot oven, there to cook slowly. Cut 2 or 3 slices of stale white bread and keep them in the oven until brown. When the time of feeding comes, pour the beef onto the bread and mash it up well. After doing this, add the meat, which has been crushed into a paste in a mortar. 1 cupful and a half of this mixture would be a hearty meal for a puppy of the very largest breed when he is 8 weeks old. It is dangerous to overfeed a puppy, but it will be easy to estimate the proper quantity of food. On the first sign of abdominal distension, the feeding should stop. Commencing with this diet, it should be slightly changed from time to time, but all changes should be gradual. Variety is essential to a growing puppy. Instead of oatmeal, Indian meal may be given occasionally, and mashed potatoes and other easily digestible vegetables may be added to the diet. After the 3rd month, scraped raw beef may be allowed each day. The quantity at first should not be over a dessert spoonful. To every puppy after the age stated, or matured dog, should be given meat, either raw or cooked, every day. If this rule is not followed, he is sure to suffer in health. If fed largely on starchy foods, oatmeal, Indian meal, puddings, and the like, he might for a time appear to remain in good condition, and yet he would not be as strong and as healthy as if he were fed properly. This ends Section 48. Some Canine Diseases and Their Remedies. Section 49 of the American Book of the Dog. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The American Book of the Dog by G.O. Shields, editor. Section 49, Spaniel Training by F.H.F. Mercer, parentheses, D. Bolton Herald, author of The Spaniel and Its Training. Owing to the space at my command being limited, the interesting subject of spaniel training cannot be gone into here in an exhaustive manner. However, the following directions are amply sufficient to show an ordinarily intelligent man the course to pursue in training a spaniel for work afield. To thoroughly train a spaniel for the field, it is well to commence when the puppy is about 3 months old. The first lesson to be taught should be that of obedience. Give your pupil to understand that you must and will be obeyed. Christen the puppy and always call him by the same name. He must learn that when you call, he is to come. If he refuses, go to him and take him by the nape of the neck, drag him to where you stood when the order was given, saying, "Come here," dog's name, "come here." And on returning to your standing place, unloose and make much of him, repeating his name with each endearment. Taking a pair of old and soft yarn socks, roll them into a ball and fasten so that they cannot come apart. Then, calling the puppy, push the ball into his face until he attempts to seize it, and when his attention is centered on the new plaything, throw it about a foot away, saying, "Go fetch," dog's name, motioning in the required direction at the same time with the hand. If he takes it in his mouth, call him to you, and should he bring it, say, "Dead bird," or "dead," opening his mouth at the same time and gently removing the ball. The greatest care should be taken not to pull the ball away, thereby laying the seed of future trouble in the shape of dismembered, perhaps eaten, birds and game. Should he refuse to fetch, but run away and gnaw at the ball, go to him, and keeping it in his mouth, draw him after you to where you stood when the ball was thrown, then say, "Dead," and proceed as before. In the event of his refusing to pick up the ball, take him behind the shoulders, and dragging him to where it lies, place it in his mouth, and proceed as before directed. Care should be taken to prevent his mauling and biting at the ball, and on his attempting to do so, order him sharply to "stop that," slapping him smartly at the same time. These lessons should be persisted in until they are thoroughly understood by the puppy. The ball should now be hidden without the pupil's knowledge, and he should then be ordered to seek dead, at the same time being shown the direction in which to quest by a wave of the hand. If he fails to find, show him where it is hidden and try again. Never let him suffer disappointment in his search, and always make him carry the ball to you and lay it at your feet. He will by this time have learned to deliver without the command to do so. Hide the ball in more and more unlikely places as he progresses, until he will at last find it no matter where it is hidden. He should not on any account be permitted to carry sticks, stones, or other hard substances, as such practices would inevitably make him hard in the mouth. Practice the retrieving sometimes in the dark, as this will teach him to depend on scent rather than sight. To teach a puppy to heel, call sharply when he is walking with you, "Heel, dog's name," and at the same time force him behind you. Should he attempt to break away, tap him smartly with a light stick or whip, and again put him behind you, repeating the command while doing so. This lesson must be thoroughly inculcated, as it is of the greatest importance that a dog should come well to heel and stay there until ordered to hie on. This latter is the easiest by far of all the lessons to impart, as the dog is always anxious to avail himself of the opportunity to indulge in a scamper. When the puppy is running at heel, say sharply, "Hie on," or "run along," waving the right or left hand forward at the same time, and run 2 or 3 steps to start him off. On a warm day, when the temperature of the water is high, take your pupil to a river bank or pond, where the beach shelves gradually under the water. You will, ere this, have sewn some thin shavings of cork into the sock ball. Fling this to the water's edge, and order the puppy to fetch. Next, throw it in so far as to oblige him to wet his feet in reaching it, and so on, farther and farther, until he is at last obliged to swim. Never go away, leaving the ball in the water, but if he refuses to fetch, get it for him, and try again, beginning the lesson anew. Whatever determination you may display in these early lessons will be infused in him. We will now suppose that our pupil has thoroughly learned the tasks hereinbefore enumerated, and that the time has come when he may be taken afield. On arriving at covert, hie him in, and his instinct then tells him to quest for game. At first let him range at will, so that he will thoroughly enter into the fun, but after a time, should he go more than an easy gunshot away, conceal yourself and oblige him to find you without any assistance. This will frighten him, and the chances are that he will range closer in the future. After a few days of this work, when he goes too far away, call to him, "Close, dog's name, close," making him come nearer to you. Should he persist in ranging too far, call him in and thrash him, saying the while, "Close, dog's name, close." Should he attempt to chase a flushed bird, call, "Where chase, dog?" and thrash him soundly, repeating the command while doing it. If a hare is sprung and the puppy attempts to chase it, shout, "Where fur?" and chastise him. He must be broken of this evil habit at all hazards. Time will accomplish the rest. It will teach him to work in the direction indicated by a wave of the hand or a nod of the head, to range never too far from the gun, and when roading a bird to wait on his master. An obstinate case of wide ranging can almost certainly be overcome by means of a choke collar and check cord. Some remarks in relation to the training of ladies' pet dogs of whatever breed may not be out of place in this connection. Even though a lady may not be desirous of giving her pet a finished education, there is so much satisfaction to be had out of the ownership of an obedient, cleanly dog who will show off a few simple tricks before a group of admiring friends that I fancy some directions on the subject will be acceptable. A puppy should not be punished for misdemeanors until he is at least 3 months old. Before that, he cannot understand what he has done that is wrong. You would not punish a year-old child. Why, then, a month-old puppy? It is a common remark, the children can do anything with Jack, and he never minds. That is all very well, but the poor dog does mind being lugged around by the ears or tail, punched, kicked, and rolled over, and it is only common humanity to check his tormentors and make their play less cruel. When the puppy has made a mess, he should be taken to the place and his nose rubbed in it. He should be scolded the while and sharply slapped. Never punish him if sufficient time has elapsed since his indiscretion to admit of the possibility of his having forgotten his fault, as he will not know what he is being punished for, and no good will be achieved. If this practice is adhered to in every case, he will soon learn to be cleanly, always provided he is allowed to run outside every now and then. A lady's pet is notoriously a disobedient dog. This is because, from the kindness of their hearts, the mistresses scruple to use the rod. Spare the rod and spoil the dog is a good motto. Not, mind you, that I advocate incessant whippings, but where punishment is needed, a thorough chastisement should be given, not a few pats and an "Oh, you naughty fellow, how could you?" I do not agree with the cynic who wrote, "A woman, a spaniel, a walnut tree, the more you beat them, the better they be." But I know that there are times when the only proper remedy for a dog is a sound thrashing. In dog training, what one has to do is gain a footing in the animal's mind by making him understand what is wanted, and teach him the meaning of words and signs. The rest is easy. To teach a dog to jump through a hoop, take a hoop of proper size, call your pupil to you, and holding the hoop over his head, wrap his legs smartly with it on the knees and say, "Jump, sir, jump." Hold him firmly and force him against the hoop, saying all the time, "Jump, jump." Then force him through it. Praise and pet him, giving him some dainty as a reward. Try it again, and if he will not go through, force him again and proceed as before. When once he will go through on being ordered, all will be well, and you can gradually hold the hoop higher and higher until he will spring several feet in the air. An important thing to remember is, never weary your pupil, and only teach one thing at a time, which he must have learned thoroughly ere you take up something new. To teach him to be dead, force him to the ground where he has been standing, saying, "Dead, sir, dead," and hold him there for a few moments. Then spring up yourself and cry, "Alive again," making him get up when you praise and pet him. Continue this until he will fall down on receiving the command, and rise also at the word. Scold him if he moves a muscle while dead, and never make him lie more than a few moments at the outset. A dog can be taught to say his prayers in precisely the same way, except you make him assume a suitable posture, with his nose on a chair or a hassock, and to spring up at the word Amen. About as good a way as any to teach a dog to stand on his hind legs is to put some stuff of which he is fond in a spoon and hold it at such a height that by standing on his hind legs he can lick it out. While doing this, say all the time, "Stand, sir, stand," and praise and pet him for so doing. In this way he will become accustomed to standing on hind legs alone, and in time will stand and walk when ordered. To teach a dog to sit up, it is best to place him in position in a corner and hold him there, saying the while, "Sit up, sir, sit up." When he will do so without restraint, reward him. In a little while, when he will sit in the corner, bring him out and make him sit without support. Trust and paid for. Hold a dainty at his nose, keeping his mouth shut, at the same time saying, "Trust, sir, trust." Then let loose his mouth, say, "Paid for," and let him eat it. 3 cheers. If you hold a dainty out of the reach of a young dog, he will generally bark at you. Therefore, when he does this, say, "3 cheers, 1, 2, 3," and at the third bark, give him the coveted morsel. Speak distinctly, and never give it to him until he has barked 3 times. Shaking hands is taught by making him sit before you and taking hold of his right paw, lifting it, and saying, "Shake hands." Next, say this again, but instead of taking hold of the leg, tap it smartly behind, saying the while, "Shake hands, shake hands." This ends Section 49, Spaniel Training. And this ends The American Book of the Dog by various authors, read for you by LibriVox volunteers.